Chapter 256. Why was it that even though they were both the top experts in Jianghu, the difference between them was so great? The old man Li Chungang liked to pick his ears and buckle his feet when he had nothing to do. Chao Chongqing, on the other hand, fit the image of a peerless expert in Jianghu. His body was tall and slender, and his divine aura was restrained. Even when he knelt down, it was soul-stirring. Even though he was an old man with white hair, if one looked carefully, he still had the mellow taste of old wine. It was believed that those middle-aged women with rich experience would be subdued by Chao Chongqing's scholarly demeanor. Su Fengnian stood at the bottom of the steps and quietly watched. Counting with his fingers, he had already seen 3 of the top 10 experts. However, the farmer Wang Mingyin had already been killed by a hand blade. Who could have predicted such an ending? Su Fengnian saw Jiang and I foolishly looking at Chao Guanzi, as if he didn't know what to do. He wanted to say something but didn't. He found it funny. This idiot, how could he think of taking advantage of the situation? If it was someone else who was slightly smarter and had the support of a great bodhisattva like Chao Guanzi, wouldn't he become arrogant? Who cares if he was a Bailiang or His Royal Highness? He would be pinched half to death by the world's number 3 Chao Chongqing with 2 fingers. At the very least, he would be beaten into a pig's head to vent his anger. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head toward Su Jihu, who was standing behind Jiang and I. He quietly signaled her not to make any moves. In front of Chao Chongqing, it was best not to add feet to a snake. Even if the old god of swords was willing to use all his strength to stop him, it would be easy for Chao Chongqing to injure anyone. In the world, the only person who could make this green-clothed official bow his head was the stupid girl that he had bullied for many years. His Royal Highness was unconvinced and sullen. In the 100 years of Jianghu, there were millions of martial artists. How many Chao Chongqing were there? For some reason, Jiang and I saw the corner of Su Fengnian's mouth curl up and instinctively glared at him. Her glare was just a small habitual action without any lethality. However, today was different from the past. With Chao Guanzi present, even though his back was facing His Royal Highness, Su Fengnian immediately felt a strong murderous intent. Chao Chongqing slowly turned his head and said, "Your Highness Chao Chongqing? As long as you nod, Chao Chongqing. As long as I can do it, I will not refuse." As long as I can? Even the 2 emperors of the Liang dynasty could not sleep well because of this old minister. Was there anything that Chao Chongqing could not do? Generally speaking, Jiang and I was only a small vase that Su Rentu had brought back to the Bailiang Palace. It did not have any real meaning. In the 8 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period, there were hundreds of imperial sons and grandsons, empresses and concubines. If they fell into the hands of the King of Yen and King of Guangling, the beautiful women would at most be reduced to concubines and maids. The mediocre women would mostly be used as prostitutes for officials. As for the princes, there was no lack of them being killed by 10 of them at once. They would become the theme of the celebration banquet. Keeping these former nobles alive, if it was said that they harbored a disloyal heart and conspired against the emperor, they would be laughed at. Since that was the case, it was fine to give away a princess of West Chu. Moreover, they could befriend one of the top 3 in the world, Chao Guanzi. Why not? The old god of swords, who had been revealed by Chao Chongqing that he had other skills besides the 2-sleeved green snake, paid no attention to this matter. The old man followed the agreement. As long as he could ensure that His Royal Highness did not die, then he wanted the little mudman to learn swordsmanship from him. As for other nonsensical matters, he did not worry about them. Moreover, Li Chungang, who had lived for more than 80 years, knew very well that as long as the little mudman stayed by His Royal Highness' side, there was an 80 to 90% chance that he would learn swordsmanship. It was better to sever this ill-fated relationship earlier. Where in the world could he not go? The old god of swords glanced at His Royal Highness with schadenfreude. He wanted to see how this kid would respond. After the reeds, he was probably afraid that the elusive assassin would take his head. He gritted his teeth and carried the 2-sleeved green snake every now and then. This kind of perseverance and ruthlessness was not at all like His Royal Highness, who was destined to be the king of Bailiang. Su Fengnian smiled mischievously and said, "No, she's mine." Jiang and I said angrily, "Who's yours?" Chao Zhongqing was as calm as a dried-up well. Perhaps he was rejoicing that this time he had traveled far and wide only to find what he was looking for without any effort. His mood was not affected by the crown prince's arrogant words. He smiled and said, "It's fine. After a while, Your Highness will change your mind. Su Fengnian still had a sloppy attitude. He smiled and said, I can't guarantee anything else, but this matter is really non-negotiable. Chao Chongqing glanced at His Royal Highness and said with a playful smile, Your Royal Highness, don't hold the blades with both hands. Wipe your sweat. Otherwise, the sword-drawing technique you learned from Dongyue's imperial family will be greatly reduced. The thick-skinned Su Fengnian laughed. As expected, he released his hands from the spring thunder-embroidered winter blades and wiped them on his sleeves. Su Jihu, who sat down in the pavilion again, smiled and the haze in her heart dissipated a little. She did not know Chao Chongqing, but Chao Guanzi had vaguely heard about him from some wanderers and officials. Naturally, she did not know that the green-robed Confucian who could make Li Chuangong's sword qi roll off the dragon wall was that famous master. However, Su Jihu had sharp eyes and dared to ignore the old god of swords and the power of Bailiang. How could she relax? She was worried about her brother's safety. She looked at Zhang and I. Femme fatale, it was true. The pity she had for this fallen princess was swept away the moment Chao Zhongqing appeared. Cold temperament? Su Jihu, who was most willing to tarnish her reputation, would never deny it. Chao Guanzi did not speak, Su Fengnian did not speak, and Zhang and I did not speak. For a moment, the atmosphere in the pavilion was heavy. It was Su Jihu who came out to smooth things over. She smiled and asked, Zhang and I, do you want to drink tea together? Chapter 257. Zhang and I nodded. Chao Zhongqing frowned, but he didn't say anything. He seemed to have made up his mind to follow the etiquette of an official in front of Zhang and I, not daring to step out of line. The group returned to the tea room. Su Hui was inside. After some polite greetings, she skillfully brewed tea. Her technique was experienced and pleasing to the eye. A woman from a noble family could see elegance in the details. She obviously noticed the unfamiliar scholar kneeling beside her. A man from a noble family, especially after 40 years of age, not to mention appearance, most of them had a spiritual qi support. Whether it was righteous qi or yin qi, it was very different from the common people. This was the so-called foundation. Su Hui could not help but take a few more glances and felt more unfathomable. Zhang and I called Uncle Qi Zhao and handed him a cup of tea. Chao Chongqing bowed his head and took it silently. Fortunately, he did not call her princess again. Su Jihu asked thoughtlessly, Zhang and I, why did you call him Uncle Qi Zhao? Zhang and I said softly, Uncle Qi Zhao is a great national player. I often watch him play chess. Chao Chongqing shook his head and said, This sinner cannot be called a national player. Then he added, This sinner will one day cut off Huang Longshi's head as a sacrifice to the late emperor. Su Huipeng was startled. Huang Longshi. This was not a mortal person. The unjust war of the spring and autumn period was all because of him. That game of chess had never been played before and would never be played again. Cut off Huang Sanjia's head? The late emperor? Su Hui, who was shocked, did not change her expression. She quickly thought about who the middle-aged scholar was. Su Fengnian did not want to be followed by Su Hui on this topic. Chen Liangxi's sudden appearance had already made him vigilant. Gong Namdu advocated talking, but those old foxes were more cunning than the other. God knows if this great scholar who became famous in one battle was a carefully planned hidden chess piece. Moreover, taking the risk to recruit Chen Liangxi was the opposite of the original intention of this trip. Bailiang's heir had just turned 20, and Su Xiao had just asked for the hereditary title in the capital. But he was already impatient to train people? What were his intentions? Su Fengnian changed the topic and asked with a smile, Sister Su, where did young Master Chen go? Su Huipu hesitated almost imperceptibly for a moment before saying gently, In the meditation room, Mr. Swan and the others were having a deep discussion about the righteousness and benefits of the Wang Ba. Perhaps they were having a confrontation earlier, and had yet to enjoy themselves to the fullest. They had to decide the winner and loser. Su Fengnian drank tea as if it were wine. He did not understand the slightest bit of elegance. He shamelessly asked for another cup of wild tea from Su Jihu. He laughed and said, Young Master Chen speaks eloquently, but it's a pity that this heir apparent does not quite understand. Fortunately, Yuan Honghu and the other scholars are knowledgeable, otherwise it would have been buried. Su Huipeng furrowed her eyebrows. She was no longer young, but her temperament was good and she had a unique charm. She patiently said, Your Highness, Although Child Chen is as talkative as the famous scholars, he does have the ability to save the world. He can't be regarded as an ordinary metaphysical person. Su Fengnian said absent-mindedly, "If that's the case, then I'll ask Big Sister to inform the Lu Mansion. If Lu Xianlang doesn't care about his talent, let Mr. Tang Shi promote him." Su Hupong's face immediately darkened when she mentioned Tang Shi sword Saint Lu Baijie. She did not speak anymore. The corner of Su Jihu's mouth curled up. Chao Chongqing said calmly, "This person is an extreme outsider. Using both the Wang Ba and the Wang Ba is just a cover. If he can establish his own school in the future, his teachings will definitely be more harmful than Yao Baifeng's school of mind. Yao Baifeng's school of Confucianism is just a little biased. Even if the Yao family's school of mind becomes popular, scholars will still be scholars and Confucians will still be Confucians. However, once this person's teachings become popular, it will be an internal injury to Confucianism. The root of the disaster will be in the belly and the disease will be incurable. If they want to set things right, it will not be as simple as cutting off a few tails of flesh. If he is not a saint on the inside, how can he be an external king? At the root, his teachings are clearly the same as Huang Longshi's. If this person's reputation is not prominent, then so be it. However, if he shows signs of establishing his own school, then I will definitely kill him." Su Hupong's face turned pale. The old god of swords sneered, "You scholars are the most vicious. Especially scholars, when it comes to killing scholars, you are more willing than anyone else. This bad habit of scholars belittling each other is even more incurable than the jealousy of women. This old man is sick of it. Chao Zhongqing, this old man will say it here today. In the future, if you want that young man, just let me know and this old man will fight with you." Chao Zhongqing indifferently declined to comment. Su Huipong firmly remembered the name Chao Chongqing. Like Su Jihu, she did not know that Chao Chongqing was the Chao Guanzi who assassinated the emperor. Otherwise, they would not dare to live in the same room. If the capital found out, it would be a disaster. This thorn had been in the hearts of the two emperors for 20 years. Before the previous emperor died, he truly said that if he did not kill Chao Guanzi, he would not be able to rest in peace. For this reason, there was a group of imperial bodyguards who were hidden in Jianghu. Each one of them was extremely skilled in martial arts. They were also assisted by a considerable number of elite soldiers who spied for information all year round in order to kill Chao Guanzi. It was rumored that after the emperor ascended the throne, he did not summon these men of sacrifice. They were all under the direct charge of the cat Han Diaoxi. It must be known that this was the great eunuch with the strongest yin qi in the world. He was a freak who could kill celestial phenomena. Han Diaoxi had white eyebrows and a white face. To put it nicely, he had white hair and a youthful face. To put it bluntly, he had turned into a demon. How many sensational and bloody scenes in the palace were not all caused by this cat? People all said that he had the ability to retain his youthful appearance because he liked to use human hearts and human liver as food. He sliced them into pieces to go with wine. Not to mention whether it was true or false, just hearing it gave off a bone-piercing chill. When the tea was hot, it would cool down. The group left Baogua Temple and returned home. Chao Chongqing stood at the door and watched Jiang and I get on the carriage with his own eyes. Su Fengnian boarded the carriage and asked, "Mr. Chao, are you going to reveal her identity to the whole world? If I don't let her go, will you follow me and let everyone know that I have a Chao Guanzi by my side?" Chao Chongqing smiled and said, "His Royal Highness is a smart person. The King of Bailiang is like father, like son." Su Fengnian was silent. Chao Chongqing didn't look at His Royal Highness. He only looked at the carriage where Jiang and I was and said with a smile, "Your Highness is still weighing the pros and cons. This decisiveness has lost to Su Shao. Even your emperor can't kill me. How can you kill me?" Chao Chongqing sensed Su Fengnian's aura. He shook his head and said, "At least you can't now. Unfortunately, I found the princess now." With these words, could it be determined that Chao Guanzi didn't dare to underestimate His Royal Highness' good fortune? Could Su Fengnian be worthy of this attention? Chao Chongqing stretched out his palm and made a repetitive action. He said, "Your Highness, as long as you are willing to go with the flow, Chao Chongqing can kill Chen Jibao for you. Su Shao is not easy to kill, you are not easy to kill, but it is the same for me." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. A man in blue killing a man in white? Chapter 258. Su Fengnian entered the carriage. There was still only Su Jihu and Princess Jing, and inside. Su Fengnian sat cross-legged, leaning against the wall of the carriage, his brows tightly furrowed. Su Jihu was somewhat distressed. He reached out and smoothed his younger brother's brows. Su Fengnian smiled somewhat bitterly. Was the delicate situation in Beiliang already so clear that even Chao Chongqing could see through it with a glance? How many emperors, especially the founding emperors of previous dynasties, didn't borrow a knife to kill people and then withdraw the knife and stab the companions by their side who were originally in charge of the knife? Dogs were raised to bite people to guard against thieves. If the thieves were gone, how could the dogs be kept to waste rations? But Beiliang was not a dynasty after all. It was divided into territories and occupied a remote corner of the country. No matter what, Su Shao was called the second emperor. Nominally, he still had to be respectful and reverent to the one in the capital. Allowing him to slaughter people and carry a knife to the palace was a vast and mighty act of heaven. It was to let the restless Beimang know that the imperial court would not be so foolish as to destroy their own thousand-year foundation. While Su Shao was ambitious and ruthless, he was not the kind of cold-hearted person who would cook the hound after the cunning rabbit had been caught. He would also not treat the old generals of Beiliang with indifference. On the contrary, Su Fengnian knew better than anyone that Su Shao had spent most of his time and energy appeasing and taking care of his former subordinates and descendants. The imperial court seemed to be enjoying this and did not tire of it. The pressure they exerted on him was just right. They did not force him, a prince with a different surname, to rebel, but they also did not let Su Shao be truly comfortable. Yan Jieshi, who had betrayed Beiliang, was a typical example. Intentionally or unintentionally, the white-clothed Confucian had monopolized Chen Jibao's power and had his own team. Even if it was not as exaggerated as having as many generals as clouds and scholars as rain, it was not too far off. Moreover, the saying that one Chen Jibao could fight half of West Chu was said by the late emperor himself in front of Su Shao and all the civil and military officials in the Baohe Palace before his death. Chen Jibao was widely acknowledged to be the best at national wars. His ability to mobilize more than 100,000 troops was superb. It was said that he remembered the names of every captain, as well as their strengths and weaknesses in leading the troops. Opportunities were fleeting, but Chen Jibao was always able to make the finishing touch in the deployment of troops. The Battle of the Western Fortress lasted 3 days and nights. Chen Jibao did not sleep or rest. Behind him, the commanding soldiers who held the flag were rotated in 6 batches of 18 people. The military historian who was in charge of recording the entire process wrote no less than 10 lines of paper. From beginning to end, Chen Jibao, dressed in white, did not move an inch. Under his countless precise orders, the last several 100,000 youths of West Chu were exhausted and killed. It was rumored that when the emperor read the record, he read it over and over again. The highlights were circled countless times, and at the end of the scroll, he wrote 8 words, truly fascinating, worthy of being called the war immortal. In these 2 years, Su Fengnian had no choice but to imagine that if Chen Jibao, whose reputation and prestige at that time was comparable to the other war immortal in white, had agreed to the emperor's request and rushed to Nanjiang, would Beiliang have been simpler? All these years, Su Shao had never mentioned anything about his adopted son, Chen Jibao. Although Su Fengnian was His Royal Highness, he did not know Su Zhao's true inner thoughts. If one were to say that Su Shao had kept Chen Jibao as a whetstone, it was even less likely that he would slaughter all of the meritorious veterans to pave the way for his successor. After Chen Jibao, the white-clothed war immortal, became so powerful that it was impossible to get rid of him. Was he really not afraid that Su Fengnian would lose to Chen Jibao? Would he, who had spent decades in the military, lose everything in the end? As long as Chen Jibao treated him coldly in Beiliang, how could Su Fengnian truly not care about anything else? Su Jihu calmly looked at his younger brother, who was deep in thought. Belatedly, he was shocked. That Chao Chongqing's surname is Chao, and he can make the old god of swords so nervous. Could he be Chao Guanzi? Su Fengnian, who had come back to his senses, said helplessly, "Unfortunately, you were right. This person is the great officer who went to the imperial palace to play hide-and-seek with the Han cats when he was bored." Princess Jing was not stupid. Jiang Ni's surname was Jiang. She was a servant girl, but when she interacted with His Royal Highness, when did she have the slightest awareness of being a servant? Pei Nanwei laughed coldly. It's one thing to secretly hide the fallen princess, but the old officials of West Chu came knocking on your door. How will your highness explain this to the capital? If the Jiangnan scholars find out about this, they will exaggerate it and provoke the emperor's anger. Won't your highness come aggressively in high spirits and leave dejectedly with a face full of dust? Su Fengnian's mood had already hit rock bottom. He said unhappily, "It's not your turn to be secretly happy. If I'm at peace, your life will be more comfortable. If I'm not at peace, how good can you be? With your tolerance, to be able to become the princess consort of Jing'an Palace, Zhao Hang must be blind with his discerning eyes. On top of that, there's Zhao Sun, who covets your body. This family is unfortunate. I saved you from the abyss of suffering. It's fine if you're not grateful, but you dare to take joy in my misfortune? Have you forgotten the taste of being slapped in the face with the embroidered winter scabbard?" Pei Nanwei only laughed coldly. Chao Chongqing and Jiang Ni's true identities will be revealed. This matter is indeed troublesome. Su Jihu said with a headache. The old swordsman in the tea room mentioned Chao Guanzi's name. Based on Su Hupong's cautious nature, she will definitely say it to the old consecrators. Su Fengnian thought about it and smiled. Troublesome is troublesome, but it's not a big deal. Although those shrewd old bastards in the Jiangnan scholar group aren't good people and like to fish in troubled waters, they may not be willing to shed all pretense of cordiality with our Bailiang. What's the benefit of having a death grudge with Su Shao? Boorish men use their blades, scholars use their mouths, and the well water doesn't interfere with the river water. Unless it's absolutely necessary, there won't be a desperate fight between pen and knife. That's fine. I've killed a few low-level scholars. Now that Chao Guanzi has come out to stir things up, I'll just treat it as giving the old family heads something to use against me. This way, their hearts will be balanced and they won't feel like they've lost face. If nothing unexpected happens, before I leave Yangchun, someone will come to remind me. It'll be nothing more than your highness. It's wrong of you to kill someone. We've caught your tail this time in Yangzhou, but it's fine. We'll let bygones be bygones and turn a blind eye to it. Therefore, your highness, shouldn't you restrain yourself a little and stop making a ruckus? It's not good for everyone. That kind of boring tone, haha. Su Jihu listened to his younger brother imitating the old pedant's tone and nodded vigorously. He couldn't help but hold his belly and laugh. Princess Jing'an couldn't believe it and muttered, "State affairs are such a trifling matter?" Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Trifling matter? How is this a trifling matter? Do you really think that aristocratic families are favored by the imperial court? That they have to wag their tails and beg for mercy from the emperor? State affairs are state affairs. How can they be compared to family affairs? If that's really the case, then wouldn't all those princesses who couldn't marry into the aristocratic families and princes who couldn't marry into the aristocratic families for hundreds of years have suffered humiliation in vain?" Su Fengnian knocked his head against the wall of the carriage and flicked the embroidered winter on his knee with his finger. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. It's only been 20 years. A centipede dies but doesn't fall down. It's hard to say what will happen in the future. It has to be said that Su Shao is really fierce. 10 aristocratic families with intertwined roots that don't recognize the emperor and only recognize the family. He chopped melons and vegetables like cutting vegetables. Those emperors who died at Su Zhao's hands might have 1 or 2 clever people who died with a smile. How could our emperor tolerate so many potholes from the 4 clans of Yangzhou appearing in the courtyard of a flat expanse of land? Bestowing the title of king and holding the fort in all directions was for the sake of cutting flesh with a blunt knife and slowly cleaning up these stubborn skin diseases. There were pros and cons to this action, but taking 10,000 steps back, if these powerful vassals wanted the position of emperor, regardless of victory or defeat, wouldn't they still be surnamed Zhao? Wouldn't the world still belong to the Zhao family? In fact, in the Spring and Autumn War, the ones who lost the most were Princess Pei's arrogant families. The current scholars are clamoring and cursing fiercely, but Su Shao wasn't afraid because he had calculated the emperor's thoughts. I dare to kill people in Yangzhou for the same reason. Princess Pei, why don't we make a bet? Right now, the scholars of Jiangnan are working with the students of the Imperial College to accuse me of ignoring the laws of the country and committing crimes. Let's bet on who will be beaten down by the emperor with a plank? Princess Jing'an nodded and said, "All right. I don't believe that the emperor won't even give you a verbal punishment." Su Fengnian struck while the iron was hot and said, "You think about the wager." Pei Nanwei was also decisive and said in a low voice, "All right." Chapter 259. Su Jihu did not mind this kind of small quarrel. Her brother was very good at dealing with women. She shifted her position and leaned against His Royal Highness. She asked, "Is Chao Chongqing's martial arts really as good as people say?" Su Fengnian let out a long breath and laughed softly. "So good that it's a paste, so fierce that it's a mess." Su Jihu asked softly, "Then what about the ginger paste?" Su Fengnian did not speak. He was able to confidently make a bet with Pei Nan Wei, even concealing the wager, because he was certain that the proud and arrogant princess consort of Jingon wasn't a shrewd businesswoman. Once she lost to him, the profits would be greater than the wager he made. But when he was up against Chao Guanzi, who he couldn't beat, scold or scheme against, he really couldn't do anything. Once one reached the peak of martial arts, they naturally had the qualifications to look down on all heroes. When Chao Chongqing first entered the imperial city, it was as if he had entered an uninhabited land. What he said was even more domineering. "Killing Zhao is my life's ambition. Don't laugh at me. So what if there are only 3 households left in Chu? I enter the imperial palace like passing through a corridor." For such a master who did not care about his life as if he was possessed by the devil, Su Fengnian aside, almost no one could do anything to him. Unless Qi Xuanjun appeared, perhaps even Wang Xianji could not stop Chao Qingyi from doing what he wanted to do with his life. That confrontation under the pavilion did not mean that Chao Chongqing could defeat the old god of swords. However, for Chao Qizhao, who did not forget West Chu, once he set his mind on something, he could ignore all the gods and Buddhas in the world. That year, thousands of imperial guards were in front of him. He still killed his way through. Wang Xianji was at the top of the building and climbed up in one breath. Today, Li Chungang was in front of him, so he naturally walked up as well. Chao Qingyi's righteousness and Li Chuangong's sword style were different paths leading to the same goal. Should he put the ginger paste? Su Fengnian did not give an answer when he arrived at the Lu Manor's freehand brushwood garden. Chao Chongqing did not enter the residence. He did not seem to be in a hurry to put pressure on His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian somewhat understood the thoughts of the 2 emperors of the dynasty. Beside the bed, in Great Peace City, there was an indescribable feeling of suffocation when such a Confucian scholar had appeared in front of him. Chao Chongqing came to the capital 3 times and the palace 3 times to let Emperor Zhao of the Liang dynasty know that the whole world was his, but he might not be able to enjoy it in peace. For the entire afternoon, His Royal Highness, with his usual expression, stayed in the freehand brushwood garden and chatted with his elder sister Su Jihu. Su Fengnian talked to her about the white fox face that had ascended to the 3rd floor, about the female Dharma king of the secret sect he had met by chance outside Xiangfan City, about the wooden sword Wenhua they had met by accident in the city, and about the girl Li Zi who had grown up in the temple. He talked about the romantic girl Wang Dongxiang and the big turtle on the Spring God Lake. As for the difficulties of practicing the knife, he skipped over in a few words. At noon, after His Royal Highness left Baogua Temple, the poor scholar and the little beggar also stepped over the threshold and continued the debate in the meditation room. The time, place, and people were all on Yuan Honghu's side. This time he had truly lost. Chen Liangxi, who had studied hard, was not discouraged. Yuan Zhongyan's clear talk was worthy of his title as the first on the left side of the river. He was not fishing for fame. There were 3 good things about Zhongnan scholars. They were good at keeping prostitutes, good at maintaining a reputation, and good at creating momentum. Those who had reached the peak were probably Yuan Zhongyan and the few people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Mr. Ambitionist. The abbot, Yin Dao Lin, lived up to his nickname as the motionless monk. He did not speak, but when Chen Liangxi rose to leave, Yuan Zhongyan did not move. He only nodded his head in acknowledgement. The old and respected Zhongnan monk personally rose to see him off to the door. Of course, the little beggar could not enter the meditation room. She stood at the door, still holding the empty watermelon in her hands. It was comical and laughable. Walking out of Baogua Temple, Chen Liangxi turned his head to look at the temple door with a faint expression of disappointment. He said to himself, "Our paths are different." "It was not my plan." The little beggar asked softly with a face full of curiosity, "Where's that kind brother?" Chen Liangxi rubbed her little head and said gently, "He should have left Baogua Temple earlier than us." The little beggar made an "oh" sound and was very disappointed. Chen Liangxi bent down to help take the watermelon. He joked, "What's wrong, little ding-dong? You like that big brother? Indeed, he's 100 times better looking than Brother Chen." The little beggar's little face flushed red. She stammered, "Looking very cute." Chen Liangxi no longer teased the little girl. The little beggar grabbed the poor scholar's sleeve and walked on the road. After hesitating for a long time, she gathered her courage and was about to raise her head to speak when Chen Liangxi lowered his head and said softly, "You know little Ding Dong still likes Brother Chen the most, right?" The little beggar smiled brilliantly. Chen Liangxi raised his head to look at the sky. His smile was intoxicating. He said, "In the future, if Brother Chen can step into the mud of history and luckily leave a footprint, you must also let little Ding Dong accompany you." Since ancient times, there had been countless heroes in troubled times, but how many could leave their names in history? Even a few dozen words would be an extravagant hope. The so-called footprint of this poor scholar who died a posthumous scholar was clearly an ambitious person who wanted to leave his name in history, and not some unofficial history compiled by a private person. How could the little beggar understand this? In her view, it was probably not as practical as eating fried watermelon slices for dinner. She only thought that Brother Chen had said something good. She was happy and skipped around. This was a rare moment of carefree. Chen Liangxi also knew that the little girl did not understand, so he said it. He threw away the teachings of the saint about investigating things, knowing sincerity, and cultivating one's body. He did not care about the inner saint's foundation or the outer king's career. He did not even think about whether or not his winding water talk had become a rare commodity worth hoarding. He only smiled and said, "Let's go. We'll go outside the temple and draw a dragon for you and grandfather on the stone slab. As usual, Brother Chen will draw the dragon and little Ding Dong will add the finishing touch." The little beggar made a heavy sound of agreement. Su Huipong stood at the entrance of Baogua Temple. She looked at the two poor figures, one big and one small, gradually disappearing into the distance. She was lost in thought. As the daughter of a noble family, she was able to become acquainted with the poor scholar Chen Liangxi because of a chance encounter by the spring outside the temple. The little beggar went into the water to pick up money and was reprimanded by the monks in the temple. Chen Liangxi, who had entered the temple to borrow the scenery to paint peonies, happened to pass by and helped the little beggar out of the situation. Su Huipong was in a good mood at the time and told Baogua Temple not to stop the little girl from picking up the wishing money in the pond. Later, she accidentally discovered that Chen Liangxi had secretly drawn a dragon. At first she was shocked by his audacity, but after a closer look she was shocked by his exquisite painting skills. It was a painting of a serpent fighting a dragon. Above it, the sky dragon could be seen in the colorful and condensed clouds, dripping with ink. The sky dragon had a long beard and a huge mouth, soaring through the clouds and mist, old and fearsome. Below it, the serpent came out of the water, clawing with its claws. The giant serpent coiled around the mountain, spitting its tongue toward the sky. At that time, the painting had already reached the end. Su Huipong was really frightened by the bizarre and strange scene. Chen Liangxi had been seen through, but he did not panic in the slightest. After chatting, they chatted happily, and she greatly admired Chen Liangxi. Only this person's edges and corners were too distinct. Su Huipong knew that only her father, a first-class famous person in Jiangnan, could tame him, so she had the intention of taking things slowly. Her original intention was for Chen Liangxi to be tempered by life for a few more years, and then she would make an exception and recommend him to the Su family. He would start as an advisor, and perhaps he could transform into a dragon. In the future, Chen Liangxi would naturally be grateful to the Su family for bestowing him with sexual intercourse. Only then could he be considered to be truly used by the family. Now, Chen Liangxi, who had monopolized the limelight of winding water, could be considered to be soaring. Very soon, his name would spread throughout Gangnam-do. If the Su family wanted to recruit him again, they would have to do it brazenly and the capital they would have to spend would be several times more than before. How could Su Huipong not hate His Royal Highness? The bigger secret was that if Lu Baijie had not appeared, she would have almost fallen to the point of having to warm the bed for this unscrupulous prince. Su Huipong concentrated on cultivating, and naturally saw this as a great humiliation. Just now, she saw Bo Ji Yuan Jiangyan in the temple. This famous person's eyes were obscure and gloomy, which made Su Huipong's hair stand on end. A famous person who could say, "Raising a soldier is not like raising a dog. It is like raising an eagle. When hungry use it and when full." He was not just a moral Confucian who only knew how to talk mysteriously. Su Huipong sighed and was disheartened. She walked out of Baogua Temple alone and narrowed her eyes. She slowly walked to the foot of the wall and said with a sad face, "Chao Chongqing? What does it have to do with me? I'll just pretend I didn't hear it." This female Taoist priest lowered her head to look at a clump of weeds and sneered, "Women are as cheap as grass." Chapter 260. In the afternoon, His Royal Highness made jokes and Su Jihu kept laughing. Her charming smile from the bottom of her heart was enough to make the fake Taoists in Gangnam-do fall head over heels for her. Unfortunately, they couldn't see it. Su Jihu was very fond of wooden sword Wenhua's catchphrase. "Little Nian, I'm very depressed right now. I'm so hungry that I don't want to eat." It's also a skill. "Little Nian, look, that little girl is not as beautiful as you. She's not as white as you. Why don't you give me a smile to satisfy my cravings?" When Su Fengnian talked about this brother who used to be together with him, his words were angry, but his eyes were gentle. When His Royal Highness talked about Miss Li Zi and Wang Dongxiang, he could clearly feel that there was a clear difference in Su Jihu's preferences. Unexpectedly, Su Jihu shed a lot of tears because of the first snow, but she didn't seem to think highly of the beautiful Wang Chudong. On the contrary, she liked the weirdly named Miss Li Zi very much. She said that this girl would be great as a concubine. She was naive and had good fortune. As for Wang Dongxiang, for a girl, it wasn't a good thing. She might not be able to escape the fate of poor fortune and a short life. Su Jihu was straightforward with these words. She said what she wanted to say and didn't hide anything. Su Fengnian smiled and said that it wouldn't happen. Since Miss Wang could attract the Kuei turtle out of the water, she must have good fortune. Su Jihu heard this explanation and nodded. She glanced at the sky outside the window. It was almost dusk, and it was time for dinner. The Shay Garden and Retreat Garden had always been independent in the Lu Manor. The two gardens did not have to participate in the family banquets. After Su Jihu married to Jiangnan, she did as the Romans did and gradually got used to the food here. However, in consideration of her brother's taste, she specifically had Chow Chow invite two famous chefs from a restaurant in the city to the Shay Garden to make a table of spicy Bailiang dishes. If one was not an expert, one would not dare to try the unique stone cooking and cooking methods of Bailiang. If it was done properly, then it would be refined. The 200 taels of silver from Widow Su, the Gangnam-do Rouge Tiger, was a hot potato. One of them heard that they were going to cook for the Bailiang heir who had killed someone on the street. Before leaving, he rushed home and cried bitterly in front of his wife and children. Looking at his wife, who only knew how to nag all day long, he found her particularly pleasing to the eye. He promised that if he could walk out of the Lu residence alive, he would never go to the brothel to squander money again. The Lu residence did not have a grand atmosphere, but it had an ingenious layout. It was well versed in the charm of hiding wind and gathering water. A green-robed scholar stepped on the top of the wall, the peak of the mountain, and the tip of the pavilion. He arrived gracefully like an immortal. Looking down at the layout of the Lu residence, the green-robed scholar nodded slightly. Finally, he landed on the lakeside. Just as his toes touched the ground, a man and a sword rushed over. The sword aura was cold. The green-robed scholar frowned slightly. His body did not move back. He stood firmly on both feet and tapped on the tip of the sword with his finger, forcibly bending the famous Ba Xiu ancient sword. Between the two was a sword that curved into an arc. The white-haired scholar's single finger did not seem to leave the Ba Xiu sword, but in reality, he was tapping again and again in an instant. After tapping on his finger for 12 times, the Ba Xiu sword finally retreated. The middle-aged scholar was as still as a mountain. Behind him, huge waves were set off in the small lake, pushing forward layer by layer, causing the flowers and trees on the opposite shore to sway incessantly. The Lu residence's representative was of course sword Immortal Tang Shi, Lu Baijie. His sword returned without achieving anything. He had already guessed the identity of the scholar in front of him. He immediately sheathed his sword and said with a surprised expression, "Chao Guanzi." Chao Qingyi smiled and said, "Sword Immortal Tang Shi has indeed grasped the essence of Yang Yuzhang swordsmanship." Chao Chongqing's trip was not in vain. Lu Baijie handed over the Ba Xiu sword to the servant who jogged over. Facing the green-robed scholar, he bowed respectfully and said, "Mr. Chao, you flatter me." Lu Baijie is uneasy. No wonder sword Immortal Tang Shi was so humble. The person he was facing now was Chao Qingyi, who shook the city in a fit of rage. If it was a normal person in the Jianghu, even if it was someone as strong as Wang Mingyin who was a rogue immortal, they would not easily provoke the government or the rich. After Su Shao stepped into the Jianghu, He suggested to the emperor to establish a secret organization that was half military and half military. It was called Zhao Go by the people of the Jianghu who trembled with fear. It was specifically targeted at the boorish people of the Jianghu who used martial arts. Once someone committed a crime, they would have to face the tireless pursuit of the assassins in this organization. In the past 10 years, how many martial artists who thought they were superior in martial arts were killed and passed on to the Jianghu? The idea of passing on one's head came from the harsh military law of the border town. If a general rebelled, his corpse would be sent to the border town to be shown to the public. This idea was created by the butcher Su Xiao. If it was in the Jianghu, the deterrence effect would be equally huge. The specific location of the passing on of one's head was also particular. There were a total of 16 sects and sects that were unfortunately named in the north and south of the Yangtze River. Among them, even Taoist orthodoxies like Mount Longhu could not escape the humiliation. Later on, when the Taoist master residence was operating in the capital city, it offered countless elixirs and miraculous medicines to the officials and dignitaries. Only then did they manage to avoid the location of the passing on of one's head. Other than Mount Longhu, Donghai Martial Emperor City was also on the list. However, after Zhao Go's special envoy was killed 6 times in a row in the Eastern Sea, the passing on of one's head was still carried out. There was no delay, but they did not enter the city. They only made a symbolic announcement outside the city before returning. It should be that both the imperial court and martial emperor city took a step back. However, these rules that were piled up in blood did not hurt Xueqi at all. In the early years, half of Zhao Go's team was in hot water chasing after the big Guanzi. However, whenever they were lucky enough to meet him, they would be killed by Chao Guanzi again and again. In the end, the executioner organization did not allow their subordinates to participate in the killing operations directly. Instead, they passed on the information to the headquarters, and then the 4 best assassins in Zhao Go's team would be dispatched together. Therefore, if Chao Chongqing was here to seek revenge on the Zhongxin Lu family, Lu Baijie would definitely not be able to stop him now. Sword Fairy Tang Shi was close to the Grandmaster realm, but unfortunately, she had no chance of winning against Chao Guanzi. Lu Baijie could not help but sigh. On the path of martial arts, the most taboo thing was to be distracted. His encounter with Yang Yuzhong when he was young could be considered a fortuitous encounter. Yang Yuzhong was not the best swordsman in the world, but he was a first-rate swordsman. His knowledge was diverse, and he was not limited to the field of swordsmanship. His knowledge was often at a strategically advantageous position. Lu Baijie was originally the son of an aristocratic family with a long history of learning. When he cultivated, he was particular about the pursuit of magic, wealth, companionship, and land. It was the same for martial arts. Naturally, Mr. Tang Shi was not lacking in any of these. His talent was extraordinary, and after being taught by Yang Yuzhong wholeheartedly, he was naturally able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. For so many years, he had been pure of heart and few desires, and did not involve himself in worldly affairs. To a large extent, he had no choice but to do so. It was true that martial arts cultivation was only at such a level. Unfortunately, when he was close to the Grandmaster realm, he still could not avoid worldly affairs. If he were to enter the imperial court, he would most likely not be able to make further progress. For a martial artist who was determined to reach the top of Jianghu, such a choice was tantamount to cutting off one of his arms. How would Su Huipeng know what Mr. Tang Shi had done in this? By the time he understood Lu Baijie's painstaking efforts, he would already be in the capital. What could the two of them do? Most of the things in the world that did not go one's way were considered bumpy if he could not tell anyone about them. Lu Baijie steadied his mind and waved his hand to signal a group of Lu Mansion warriors in the distance to retreat. He then asked, "May I know why Mr. Chao is here?" Chao Chongqing said indifferently, "I'm just taking a look. I won't be staying for too long." Lu Baijie heaved a sigh of relief. Since Chao Guanzi did not come to the Lu Mansion to stir up trouble, Lu Baijie did not need to be on guard. No one in Yangzhou had such confidence, except for Sword Immortal Tang Shi. Therefore, Lu Baijie invited him warmly. "Could Mr. Chao come to Retreat Garden for a chat? Baijie has many problems in swordsmanship that I would like to consult you about. I hope you can help me resolve my doubts." "Thank you very much." Chao Chongqing smiled and said, "Please lead the way, Sword Immortal Tang Shi." The freehand painting garden was very freehand. Back in the garden, Lu Baijie really did ask Chao Zhongqing a lot of questions about the way of the sword that had accumulated in her heart. Chao Guanzi told her everything he knew, and his speech and actions were very elegant. This was the first time Lu Baijie had met Chao Zhongqing. At first, she was wary, but after a few hours, she admired him. Chao Zhongqing did not have any prejudice against sections. He explained his doubts in simple terms. He spoke tirelessly and did not consider himself as a senior at all. The saint said that if one studied alone without friends, he would be ignorant. Everyone understood this, but how could a person like Mr. Tang Shi find a friend who was worth talking to and sharing his sincerity with? Lu Baijie, who suddenly saw the light in swordsmanship, sighed in his heart. Chao Zhongqing lived up to his name. At dusk, Lu Baijie sat upright and asked again, "What does Mr. Chao want?" This time, Mr. Tang Shi was very sincere. Chao Zhongqing shook his head and only asked, "I believe that Mr. Tang Shi understands His Royal Highness, Su Fengnian, better than I do. If he cares about something very much and someone wants to take it away, will he give it to them?" Lu Baijie remembered the scene at the gate of the Lu mansion. After some thought, he said in a low voice, "If it was something as important as his family, this person would definitely not give it to them. Other than that, he is not a petty person. This person is very scheming and shrewd. It is not good to talk nonsense." Chao Zhongqing smiled and said, "Then it will be fine." To him, Xianxia was the princess of West Chu. To His Royal Highness she was nothing. Chapter 261. Lu Baijie and Chao Zhongqing arrived at the leisure garden together. Mr. Tangshi's boldness made Su Fengnian have a whole new level of respect for him. Even he had to regard Mr. Tangshi as a wolf, tiger, or leopard. The Lu family's roots were in Jiangnan. Although it was thousands of miles away from the capital, it was not as far away as Beiliang, where the emperor was far away. Nowadays, the grand families were on the wane. They had changed from strategic planning to internal strife. The emperor's control over the noble families was becoming more and more satisfactory. Once the Lu family was found to have an affair with Chao Zhongqing, it might implicate the family head, Lu Daolin. Not to mention losing his noble position as the chancellor of the Imperial College, it was hard to say whether he would be able to walk out of the capital alive. Thus, with the presence of Lu Baijie and Chao Zhongqing, the banquet at the leisure garden became even livelier. At this table, there were 2 people on the martial arts ranking list. Adding the Tangshi sword Immortal, this could frighten the people of Jianghu. On the table, 2/3 of the dishes were Beiliang dishes and 1/3 of the classic Jiangnan dishes. The bowls and plates were all made by the big official kilns in Jiangnan. During the spring and autumn period, there were no inscriptions on bowls and porcelain. Now, the world was peaceful, and inscriptions were in vogue. Chao Zhongqing lowered his head to look at a small porcelain bowl with a purple mouth and iron feet. He sighed with a regretful expression. Porcelain bowls and porcelain were fragile. If the bowl was broken, the words would die. How could this be considered an elegant matter? However, outsiders did not know of Chao Zhongqing's scholarly spirit, and only thought of him as an expert whose thoughts could not be guessed. To Su Jihu's left was Su Fengnian, and to his right was Jiang Enai. He did not show favoritism and helped himself to the food. The Crown Prince of Beiliang and Princess Taiping would occasionally eat the same dish. According to past situations, Su Fengnian would have to go through a fierce battle before he could win. This time, Jiang Enai was like a frost-beaten eggplant. When he saw Su Fengnian extend his chopsticks, he withdrew his hand. The meal was neither hot nor cold. At this table, it was Yu Wei who looked the most indifferent and calm. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Su Jihu was not close to this courtesan girl. After entering the Lu manor, they did not speak a single word. After the sumptuous banquet, Su Jihu took his brother for a walk. Jiang Enai, the elderly god of swords, Chao Qingyi, and Lu Baijie stayed in the freehand garden to cool off. Su Jihu sat in the pavilion by the lake and said worriedly, "Chao Zhongqing is determined to get Jiang Enai." Su Fengnian rubbed his cheeks. Seeing that there were no outsiders nearby, he said calmly, "This Chao Guanzi said that as long as he is willing to hand over his Princess Taiping, he will go and kill Chen Jibao." Su Jihu sucked in a cold breath and frowned. "Really?" Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, "With Chao Guanzi's status, why would he joke with a junior like me?" Su Jihu muttered to himself, "Do you think that this is a plan that our father had long thought of?" Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Sister, Are you saying that Su Xiao predicted that this day would come? To let Chao Guanzi, an outsider, break the trap? Isn't that a little too godly? You have to know that Su Xiao's chess skills are really unsightly. He could even go head-to-head with Shangyin Academy's Chancellor Wang. Besides, Su Xiao may not necessarily want to kill Chen Zhibao. Su Jihu thought for a while and said carefully, if you don't want to kill Chen Zhibao, you can slowly compete with him. If you want to kill him and let you be the executioner, you might be able to establish your power. However, it will be too much of a loss for Northern Liang. Chen Zhibao is not someone who is easy to deal with. He is willing to be our father's adopted son, but he might not be willing to be your stepping stone. Once there is internal strife in Northern Liang, the imperial court will have nothing to fear. Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang are mortal enemies, and the two of them have been secretly communicating with each other for a long time. If Chen Zhibao escapes alone, it will not only cause the Northern Liang to be divided and the army's morale to drop. Chen Zhibao might even become the second Gu Jiantang. Su Fengnian nodded with a smile. Indeed, Gu Jiantang might not be able to defeat Su Xiao in this lifetime, but that doesn't mean that the independent Chen Zhibao won't be able to defeat a mediocre heir like me. It seems Chao Guanzi's intervention is most in line with Beiliang's long-term interests. Su Xiao either had the guidance of an expert like Li Yishan, or it was purely a brainless and unreasonable move, and he was hit by a stroke of luck. Su Jihu asked softly, Fengnian, are you planning to let him go? Su Fengnian glanced at Twilight and muttered to himself, if I say I won't let him go, then I'll be suspected of being a stubborn duck. Anyone can recklessly oppose Chao Chongqing. At worst, they'll lose their life, but I don't think I can do it. After all, Su Xiao is already so old, and I can't just make things difficult for him. Moreover, my personal relationship with Chao Chongqing has definitely crossed the bottom line of that person in the capital. Even Su Xiao can't say he can't take it all. This time, Chao Chongqing has really hit me where it hurts. He's certain that I'm not the ignorant and fearless heir of His Royal Highness. Add to that the huge bait he threw out to kill Chen Bai. I'm guessing he's secretly rejoicing right now. Su Jihu asked softly, do you like that lass a lot? Su Fengnian made a silly face and said with a laugh, how can I not like her? I've been looking at her for so many years, and she's only getting prettier as she grows. I never get tired of looking at her, so of course I like her. Su Jihu sighed. Do you only like her? Su Fengnian was startled. This wasn't a question at all, but it seemed he had never given it much thought. Su Jihu rubbed her brother's brows and asked with a smile, Sister is curious about who you're afraid of? Su Fengnian laughed. Of course, I'm afraid you'll be unhappy and second sister will be angry. Su Jihu shook her head and said seriously, that's not what I'm talking about. It's the kind of person you're really afraid of and can't sleep at night. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment before saying slowly, I'm afraid of that person in the capital. I'm afraid he'll feel that it's too troublesome to even borrow a knife to kill someone. In the end, he'll shed all pretense of cordiality and kill the person himself. Chapter 262. Su Jihu grunted in agreement. If the person in the capital was a wise ruler in the normal sense, then so be it, but things were not so simple. His diligence had almost reached an abnormal level. Logically speaking, this kind of abnormal diligence could only appear in the founding emperors of commoners. However, ever since he ascended the throne, his drive to govern the world was like an old farmer who had saved up all his life to buy a few acres of land. He was simply cautious and conscientious and tireless. Last year, the Ministry of Rights had a shocking record. In the 7 days after New Year's Day, he had received more than 1,500 memorials from the 3 provinces and 6 ministries. More than 3,600 matters. In reality, this emperor's royal study was lit up almost every night until the 3rd watch. It was rumored that the great eunuch Han Diaosi had to risk his life several times to remonstrate and plead for more rain and dew in the harem. Once, this person summoned relatives from Jiangnan and wrote a poem. In it, he jokingly said, the officials have slept, but I have not slept, and the officials have not risen, but I have risen. It was rumored that once this poem came out, no one in the court dared to question Grand Secretary Zhang Julu's governance. With such great talent and strategy, as well as being extraordinarily diligent, which meritorious official would not be afraid? Loyal officials were afraid of muddle-headed rulers, but powerful officials were most afraid of wise rulers. As the saying goes, a new emperor brings new officials. This was just a bit more glossy and warm than cooking the hound after the cunning rabbit had died. However, it also exposed all the mysteries. How many old officials did not accompany the old ruler to continue their loyalty in the underworld? Su Fengnian continued, I'm afraid of Su Xiao. Su Jihu was surprised and joked, that's strange. Anyone in the world can be afraid of the king of Bailiang, but you're afraid of our father? Su Fengnian muttered, afraid that Su Xiao is old. Su Jihu was silent. Su Fengnian calmly said, then I'm afraid that Chen Zhibao will rebel. Su Jihu nodded. This answer was within reason. Chen Zhibao was not only a talented general, but also a talented general. Apart from experience, he was not inferior to the king of Bailiang, Su Xiao. Otherwise, he would not have earned the two nicknames of War Immortal and Villain Butcher. In terms of ruthlessness, he was superior to Su Xiao. To be friends with such an ambitious and ruthless character was undoubtedly a blessing, but to be enemies was a great misfortune. In front of the western wall, Jiang Bingxing witnessed the scene of his wife and son being dragged to death with blood dripping from the corners of their mouths. Although it was not recorded in any official or unofficial history, all the authorities after the end of the spring and autumn period still had lingering fears. In the Shangyin Academy, there was once a top military official who said that if Chen Zhibao and the only remaining military expert Gu Jiantang were given 100,000 soldiers each, the chances of victory would be 50-50. However, if they were given 300,000 soldiers, Chen Zhibao would definitely win. Of course, this was under the premise that the battlefield was not taken into account, but it was enough to prove Chen Zhibao's terrifying strength. The imperial court did not dare to overly suppress Su Xiao, partly because they were afraid that Chen Zhibao would use this as an excuse to rebel. After all, that person in the capital had long been fascinated by the white-clothed War Immortal. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled, squinted his eyes and said softly, in the end, I'm afraid of old Huang. Su Jihu was completely dumbfounded, his face full of doubts. Su Fengnian smiled and said, when I was traveling with him, I was always on tenterhooks, afraid that he would die. Without old Huang, how could I walk 6,000 miles? 300 miles was enough for me to die of exhaustion, hunger, and boredom. Su Fengnian looked at his elder sister, Su Jihu, and said, we have endured 6,000 miles, and old Huang is not dead. I am not dead, neither of us is dead. But why did old Huang run to that bullshit martial emperor city and die? Naturally, Su Jihu could not give an answer. Su Fengnian raised his head and said, dying in Western Shu is not a bad thing. After all, it is his hometown. Su Jihu cried. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and helped to wipe away her tears. Sister, why are you crying? When old Huang was feeding your horse, every time you saw this old man with a missing front tooth, you would not be happy. Su Jihu glared at him. Su Fengnian finally said, Jiang and I remember the first time we met. She was still a little girl, and she was already carrying a grudge against her country and family. Actually, she did not know much about national grudges, but if she was asked to take revenge against Su Xiao, a coward like her who was afraid of thunder, ghosts, and anything else, she would not dare to do so. She looked around with her eyes wide open, and in the end, I was the one who was the easiest to deal with. If she did not look for me, who else could she look for? Apart from her identity as Princess Taiping, what else was special about her? Her hands would get cold when she made a snowman, and she would not get tired when she washed clothes. After seeing me practicing my saber on Mount Wudong, she was even more afraid of the hardships of martial arts. This narrow-minded girl was not too stupid. With my support, she dared to go against Princess Sui Zhu. Did she really think that we were princesses on equal footing? Later, she was afraid that her heart would soften, so she wrote a death vow. In the end, she was ruthlessly taught a lesson by second sister who had returned to Bailiang. Didn't she still bear a grudge against me? Not only was she narrow-minded, she was also stingy. When she had nothing to do, she would secretly count her copper coins. But to say that she was stingy is also not right. She gave away the talisman just like that. In the end, she was just a simple little girl. I could see through her schemes that she thought were well hidden. I did not say anything and just thought that it was quite fun. When I was young, Mother once pulled Jiangni's hand and pointed at her cheeks. She told me that those two dimples were because she had passed through the gates of hell and arrived at the Bridge of Helplessness on the Yellow Springs Road. She did not want to forget the person she cared about in her previous life, so she did not drink the old granny's soup of Meng Pa. Instead, she jumped into the Wangchuan River under the bridge and suffered 10 lifetimes of water and fire before reincarnating, all for the sake of finding the person she cared about. At that time I was also young and ignorant. Wasn't it because I was standing in front of her? I thought that no matter what in this life, I would not let this little girl with 2 dimples be bullied by outsiders. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and smiled. Now it seems that if she regrets it, she must have decided to not meet me in her next life on the bridge of helplessness. Su Jihu said helplessly. You believe this saying? Su Fengnian nodded. Whatever mother says, I believe. Su Jihu was just about to tease him when he saw Jiang and I standing outside the pavilion, not daring to enter. He got up and walked out of the pavilion, pushing her up the steps. Su Jihu smiled and shook his head, then directly left. After Chao Guanzi stirred up the situation, the atmosphere was so subtle that the two of them were speechless. Su Fengnian took the lead and said in a bad mood, What are you doing, coming to collect the debt? Since I have paid the money, we can go our separate ways? Jiang and I turned her head, stretched out a small hand, and angrily said, 212 taels of silver, 72 copper coins. Su Fengnian sneered. Fine, I will convert it to copper coins and let you leave here with a big sack. Jiang and I coldly snorted and turned to leave. Walking out of the pavilion, she turned her head and saw that he was facing the lake. His back was a little cold. After a long time, Su Fengnian said, You still haven't left? No matter how powerful Chao Guanzi is, if he forced me into a corner, I will just burn both jade and common stone. Who lives and who dies? It will depend on who is more arrogant between him and Li Chungang. Jiang Ni's voice was as soft as a mosquito. If I leave, will I not be able to kill you? Su Fengnian turned around and smiled. Of course not, with Chao Guanzi and the old sword god teaching you, maybe in a few years, you will be able to kill me. Go, don't hang around in front of me every day. If you are not here, remember to tell me before you kill me, so I can have a good sleep. I will sleep for as many years as I can. Jiang and I bit her lips and said, Then I won't leave. If the romantic Chao Guanzi heard this, wouldn't he vomit blood? Chapter 263. Su Jihu understood the fickleness of human nature, so he had Bluebird send a few snacks and fruits to the pavilion, which were very good for relieving the heat. Su Fengnian sat down cross-legged, facing Jiang and I who had returned to the pavilion. Su Fengnian raised his head and stared at the Princess Taiping whose chest was no longer peaceful. For some reason, he thought of the painting in the study room of the Bailiang Palace, the painting of the Spring Thunder evil flood dragon. The flood dragon crouched on a large rock in the middle of the river, naturally spectacular. However, Su Fengnian was more concerned about the furnace goddess by the riverside, who was stealing glances but didn't say anything. She looked exactly the same as the woman in front of him. That painting was said to have come from the hands of a great practitioner from the previous dynasty, and it contained a prophecy. Prophecies could be divided into 2 types, good prophecies and bad prophecies. When Su Fengnian was young, he often studied it with his mother, but he couldn't see anything profound about it. He only felt that the evil flood dragon's aura was oppressive, and he reckoned that it probably wouldn't be able to escape the fate of the bad prophecy. Su Fengnian picked up a piece of iced watermelon, and as he chewed, he asked, Do you know who that Uncle Ches Xiao is? Jiang and I hesitated for a moment, and then she sat down leaning against the vermilion pillar. She shook her head and said, I only know that Uncle Ches Xiao's surname is Chao. Mother said that he's very talented. When she said the word mother, her expression dimmed. She should have called her mother. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and sneered, He's not just very talented. The old sword god is ranked 8th in the Wushu rankings, and Chao Chongqing has already been the Tanhua prince for 2 consecutive years. People in Jianghu call him Chao Wudi, Chao Guanzi. Now that you're rich and have the old sword god's favor, he's crying and begging to take you as his disciple. In addition, His Royal Highness Chao Guanzi is eagerly running over to be your imperial bodyguard. I'm puzzled. Normal people are like dogs when they ask for a master, but you're different. Experts are as worthless as cabbages by the roadside. No wonder Li Yishan said that you're blessed. I'm wondering if you can cause a natural phenomenon when you shake your body? Little mud man, why don't you shake it? Jiang and I rarely touched her chopsticks during the banquet, so she couldn't help but feel hungry when she saw the Linlang desserts. However, she was too shy to reach out her hand. She was already in a bad mood when she was hungry, so when she heard His Highness the Crown Prince's teasing, she suddenly became angry and glared at him, Shake your head. Su Fengnian first pushed the plate filled with various desserts towards Jiang and I, then said coldly, "Let me tell you something serious. Practicing martial arts is like practicing Taoism. You can't escape from the 5 words, root, technique, companions, wealth, and location. The root is the bone structure. It's the most important. However, I believe that no matter how bad your talent is, it shouldn't be too bad." Next was the Dhamma, which was the Dhamma gate. Entering the Tao without a gate was like pouring water on a stubborn stone. One's life was less than 100 years. With a famous teacher leading the way, you'll be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. In this regard, you're even luckier than I am. I was only able to survive in the common reed marsh because I obtained Wudong's great yellow courtyard. You have Chao Chongqing and Li Chungang, 2 great masters who only appear once every 100 years, teaching you wholeheartedly. In the Lu mansion, I can't easily ask the old sword god for advice. If I enter the Bailiang army, I may not be able to concentrate on practicing martial arts. You are different. You have Chao Chongqing to protect you. Even if he wants to use your Taiping princess name to revive the country, you can still live without worries. If you lose, you will just run away from Jianghu. If you win, you may become the 2nd female emperor in 100 years. At that time, even if you can't practice martial arts, killing me will be as easy as snapping your fingers. Only an idiot wouldn't do this kind of business without any capital. Jiang and I put a piece of soft fat into her mouth. Her cheeks bulged and her dimples appeared. She said indistinctly, "You are exaggerating. You just want me to leave." I am not stupid. Uncle Qi Zhao is amazing. But how difficult is it to revive the country? The king of Bailiang has 300,000 Bailiang cavalry, and he still doesn't dare to be emperor. So what if Uncle Qi Zhao is the 3rd most powerful expert in the world? Can he defeat 300,000 people? If I leave, I won't be able to kill you for the rest of my life. Do you think I will let you succeed? Su Fengnian said with a smile, "Oh, you are not really stupid." Jiang and I swallowed the snack and picked up a bowl of crystal sugar lotus seed lily. After eating it, she felt refreshed. Su Fengnian crossed his arms and put his knees on the spring thunder embroidered winter saber. He said with a smile, "Then you can kill me if you stay by my side? Count with your fingers how many beauties we've met along the way. I have big sister Yu and Auntie Shu by my side now. They're so aggressive here. Look at yourself." Su Fengnian loosened his 10 fingers and made a cupping gesture in front of his chest. Jiang and I was angry. She used her sleeve to wipe her mouth. She raised her eyebrows and said angrily, "Burden! You can taste the sour taste of lotus seed lily in your mouth?" Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and continued, "Okay, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about her appearance and figure. Princess Jing'an Pei Nanwei is not beautiful? She is a great beauty on the rouge scale. She doesn't even accept money for her studies. She can even play chess with me to relieve my boredom. You have nothing to do with this." Jiang and I turned a deaf ear. She was smart enough not to bicker with His Royal Highness. She just wolfed down the food. Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the lake. There were dozens of koi fish swimming near the pavilion. Although it couldn't compare to Bailiang Palace, it was better than nothing. He snatched some screw cakes from the tiger's mouth and threw them into the lake. The little clay figurine could be indifferent to the masters on the rankings, but he couldn't. Those he had met before, whether it was old Huang with a box on his back or the white-haired old man, Li Chungang, or Wang Zhonglo, were not enemies he had to face directly. He didn't have a deep impression of them. It wasn't until he met the 11th prince, Wang Mingyin, outside of Shangfan City, and Chao Guanzi, who was now only on the line between friend and foe, that he realized the terror of these top figures. At that time, Wang Mingyin had forcefully resisted the 2-sleeved green snake and rushed forward with murderous intent. Chao Chongqing, who looked cultured and refined, was also full of murderous intent. If he had a choice, Su Fengnian would rather sit at the same table as King of Jing'an and Zhao Hang. Chapter 264. Both in the lake pavilion and in the freehand garden, the two sides had stolen half a day of leisure. In the freehand garden came the long-forgotten Princess Taiping. The conversation between Chao Chongqing and Lu Baijie appeared to be boundless and unrestrained. For some reason, they brought up Zhang Julu's earth-shaking governance. The Liang dynasty followed the old system of 3 provinces and 6 ministries. Among the 3 provinces, The Xianxia province had the greatest responsibility and was divided into 6 ministries. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister and Second Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister and Second Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister and Second Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries were fully deserving of the title of First Minister of the Imperial Court. The Xianxia ministers of the 6 ministries at that time. It immediately attracted a lot of criticism. Firstly, it was said that this purple-bearded blue-eyed man had forgotten his roots. Secondly, it was said that he only dared to pick soft persimmons to bully. Chao Chongqing said softly, "Selecting scholars for poetry is an ancient method. Of course, it's empty and unrefined. Writing a good poem may not be able to govern the world well. But if we select Confucian scholars according to Zhang Bian's 8-paragraph essay, it's hard to say how big the pros and cons are." Mr. Tongxi Lu Baijie said with a laugh, "I originally thought that Mr. Chao's method of dealing with Grand Secretary Zhang was a forceful whipping." Chao Chongqing shook his head and said, "A carp leaping over the dragon's gate. Zhang Julu is personally erecting a dragon's gate for the scholars. This kind of grand and magnificent style is only inferior to Huang Longshi. Once this method was put out, if it was successful and spread throughout the world, it would be equivalent to finding a smooth path for the poor scholars. The foundation of the rich and powerful families would be shaken again." Zhang Julu was indeed talented in economics. He was well aware of the principle that it was better to let loose than to block the will of the people. The spring and autumn period was precisely because he had completely blocked the path of the people's advancement, which led to the chaos. It's just that those aristocratic families aren't all blind. At this point, Chao Chongqing stopped talking. Lu Baijie couldn't help but smile wryly. Didn't the open-minded elder brother Lu Daolin also detest the 8th stage? Let alone people like Yuan Jiangyan. It was only because Zhang Julu was currently favored like the sun in the midday sky, the emperor supporting him without holding back, that he had to swallow his anger. No matter how great the favor was, there would always be a day when it would weaken. When the time came, the rich and powerful families would erupt in anger. What would happen to Zhang Julu, heaven knew. With Zhang Julu's insight, it wasn't necessarily that he didn't see this hidden danger. The deeper the rebound, the greater the danger. It was just that he didn't know why this first pillar of the dynasty always insisted on doing this. Chao Chongqing was outside of the situation. Moreover, unlike Lu Baijie, who had been focused on martial arts for many years, he could see the general trend of the world more clearly. The reason why he admired that blue-eyed man was because this person had a deep fear of Bailiang Su Shao, and even had a prejudice against the big shots of the Ministry of War headed by Gu Jiantang. However, it wasn't limited to the struggle for power in the imperial court. In the true sense, he was resolute in his plans for the long-term stability of the dynasty. If it was an outstanding figure with the slightest desire for power, he would spend a lot of energy to deal with a prince with a different surname, Su Shao, or even the 6 vassal princes to stabilize his position in the emperor's heart. However, Zhang Julu was different. For the sake of the overall situation, he was willing to work together with Gu Jiantang to plan things together, and could confide in the elders of the 8 kingdoms. Chao Chongqing was good at observing the situation and was good at judging the situation. He could roughly see that Zhang Julu might have done a great favor to the Liang dynasty when he was alive, so much so that even the title of chief scholar and posthumous title of Wenzheng were insufficient to describe his great achievements. However, after his death, he would most likely bring disaster to his family. He was far less intelligent than the black-clothed sickly tiger Yang Tai-sui. Chao Chongqing sighed in his heart. As scholars, we will not pass on this responsibility. It is a pity that Zhang Julu was not born in West Chu. Lu Baijie wanted to say something but hesitated. Chao Chongqing smiled and said, "Tang Shi, if you have something to say, say it." Lu Baijie, who had already guessed the inside story, went straight to the point and asked, "Is he not afraid that His Royal Highness will take the initiative to join forces with Zhao Go? Not only will he be able to keep Princess Taiping, but he will also be able to express his loyalty to the court?" Chao Chongqing laughed and said, "That is good. To tell you the truth, this kind of seemingly unreasonable move is exactly what Chao Chongqing wants." The old god of swords, who had been kicking at the side, laughed coldly and interrupted, "Don't worry. That Su fellow is not that stupid." Chao Chongqing did not think much of it. He slowly got up and walked out of the freehand garden. The old man with the sheepskin fur coat sighed and said, "This old man can roughly guess how this fellow will end up. Scholars are full of evil tricks. Sigh, it looks like that Su fellow is going to lose this time." The green-clothed Chao Guanzi came to the pavilion. Jiang and I just happened to come out of the pavilion and stand on the steps. Chao Chongqing bowed and said, "If the princess wants to marry into the Bailiang Palace, Chao Chongqing can leave today." Jiang and I looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face pale. If some things are not said clearly and you deceive yourself and others, you can be muddle-headed for the rest of your life and play around easily. But if it is said clearly, even immortals have no leeway to mediate. In the pavilion, Su Fengnian subconsciously raised his hand, as if he wanted to pull something, but he put it down in the end. Lifting something is not heavy, but putting it down is difficult. Jiang and I turned his head and glanced at His Royal Highness, who was always frivolous and always had a smile on his face. Su Fengnian, who was sitting cross-legged on the bench, smiled and waved his hand. Chao Chongqing said expressionlessly, "Chao Chongqing will definitely keep his promise." Su Fengnian withdrew his smile and only said one word. "Scram." Chapter 265. His Royal Highness gritted his teeth and said, "Scram," to everyone's satisfaction. As a result, the entire pavilion cracked inch by inch. Su Fengnian accompanied Jiang and I, who had regained her identity as Princess Taiping, as they walked slowly with their backs to the pavilion. When Su Jihu, the old sword god, and the others heard the commotion and rushed over, they only saw Su Fengnian sitting in the dust. It was hard to tell whether he was embarrassed or angry. Su Jihu, who loved her brother the most, couldn't hide the anger on her face. She wished she could use the military seal to encircle and annihilate the rebellious Chao Guanzi. In the past 2 days, there were 2 major events in Yangchun City. One was the gathering of famous people in Baogua Temple. The other was Gu Jiantang's former subordinates leading troops into the city. They were undoubtedly targeting the Crown Prince of Bailiang. With the connections Su Jihu had accumulated in Gangnam-do over the years, it wasn't that he couldn't take advantage of the situation. At the very least, he could make Chao Chongqing unable to continue acting mysterious. However, Su Fengnian, who had been warned by the pavilion's destruction, didn't crazily fight Chao Chongqing to the death. He got up and walked toward his elder sister Su Jihu. He held her hand and squeezed out a smile. Su Jihu felt even more uncomfortable, but she finally managed to hide the anger on her face. The siblings returned to the comfortable garden and sat down. Not long after, Bluebird stood at the door and reported, "Princess Chong, Your Highness, Jiang and I and Chao Chongqing have left in the carriage arranged by Tangxi Sword Saint." Su Fengnian asked, "Li Chungang left with them?" Bluebird shook her head and said, "No, the old sword god asked me to pass a message to Your Highness. He will only leave when he returns to Bailiang." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "What a great reassurance." Su Jihu hesitated for a moment and took out a letter from her sleeve. She smiled and said, "When it rains it pours." Your second sister just sent a letter saying that you shouldn't go to Xianxia Academy. Even if you go, she won't see you. It seems that she's really angry that you came to Hudding County first and not her place. What should I do? Do you want me to plead on your behalf? Su Fengnian smiled bitterly and said, Don't add fuel to the fire. At worst, I'll take a detour to Mount Longhu to find Huang Manor. Since I didn't go to see second sister first, I should at least pretend that I'm going to Xianxia Academy as the finale. Otherwise, second sister will definitely refuse to see me. When it came to Su Weisheng, Su Jihu had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. After all, they were sisters. He nodded and said softly, Your second sister is very ambitious. She cares about you very much. After you meet Huang Manor, don't send her a letter saying that you're going to visit her at the school. Give her a surprise. Then she won't be able to keep a straight face. Su Fengnian's thoughts wandered. He frowned and asked, This time I fought in Yangchun City. Will it embarrass Lu Daolin? Su Jihu said confidently, It's not a big deal. The position of the Chancellor of the Imperial College is noble, but it's not as practical as the position of Minister of the Six Ministries. In the past, we had to be careful of our Confucian demeanor and couldn't lower ourselves to do it. This time, we suffered a loss, but we might gain a blessing in disguise. Moreover, Uncle has already made up his mind to take up a position in the Ministry of War. Although the rich families compete for power, Gu Jiantang has always been in charge of the Ministry of War. Among the 6 ministries, the members of the aristocratic families in the Ministry of War have the least say. This time, even if they don't get along with Madame Lu, they'll have to pinch their noses and agree. If the head of the Lu family can take charge of another ministry, Madame Lu will have a higher status. She won't have to be bullied by both sides like before. The scholars of the various holes, the heads of the 2 provinces, the 6 ministers, and the assistant ministers of the 6 ministries. There are more than 20 people in total. These people can be considered the first line of officials in the capital. Whether or not a family can gain power depends on whether or not they can occupy 1 or 2 of these positions. Because the palace secretariat has been reluctant to part with its head of the palace secretariat for a long time, the dozen or so great yellow sects all have their own positions. Moreover, that person in the capital doesn't allow these people to band together. Instead, they're not as powerful as the 6 ministries. Su Fengnian sighed, Just thinking about it gives me a headache. Su Jihu asked, You're letting them go just like that? Su Fengnian said helplessly, Chao Zhongqing, this fellow is an old sparrow on the Spring God Lake. What kind of storms and waves hasn't he seen before? The fact that he didn't make a move against me is already giving face to Zhang and I. In front of me were 2 paths. The first was to hope that Li Chungang would go all out and pull in Zhao Go, the government, and the military to kill Chao Chongqing together. If I offended him too much like this, it would ruin Chao Chongqing's overall situation. Once he escapes, let alone me, perhaps even Su Xiao would have to brace himself to deal with his assassination. I know that this kind of expert sneak attack is unsolvable. A single Miss Hehe has put my life on the line several times. If Chao Chongqing wants to kill someone, only that person in the capital can barely maintain a stalemate. The other path was that what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. What can I do? What can I do when my skills are not as good as his? Jianghu is a dangerous place. As a result, if one drifts in Jianghu, how can one not suffer a blade? This was what Wenhua said, and it really made sense. Otherwise, I would like to heroically say to Chao Guanzi that if he has the ability, then come and fight me. But can I? It's possible that as soon as I finished speaking, my head would be taken away. Su Jihu patted the back of His Royal Highness's hand and consoled, The sooner you master the Bailiang cavalry, the sooner you don't have to be afraid of anyone. Su Fengnian smiled. Sis, don't worry. The 6,000 li that I walked with old Huang was not in vain. My heart won't be broken so easily. Hua's dog mouth can't spit out ivory, but how can he not suffer a blade? There's another sentence after that. It's very chewy. Su Jihu curiously asked, Let's hear it. Su Fengnian laughed and said, If one drifts in Jianghu, how can one always suffer a blade? Su Jihu clutched his stomach and laughed until tears suddenly flowed out of his eyes. It wasn't clear whether he was amused or sad. This was the second time today that Su Fengnian helped his elder sister wipe away her tears. He gently said, Sis, it's about time for me to leave. If you continue crying, I won't be able to leave. Su Jihu suppressed the reluctance in his heart and pretended to be magnanimous. Go, go, go. I originally wanted to introduce you to some beauties with clean backgrounds. The women in Gangnam-do are all fresh and beautiful. It's better that you leave, lest my heir Qiao's soul is distracted. Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and said, That girl heir Qiao is muddle-headed or blind. Why would she fall for me? Su Jihu's eyes unknowingly filled with tears again. He laughed with a sobbing tone. Do you think that everyone is as heartless as that girl Jiang and I? You leave just like that. Even if you raise a dog, you've already developed feelings for it. Su Fengnian sighed. Sis, you've gone overboard. Su Jihu heavily exhaled and said indignantly, It's not easy for her either. She's so small and yet she has to carry the entire West Chu on her shoulders. At the end of the day, Chao Zhongqing is the one who isn't a good person. Entering the imperial palace 3 times in these years sounds quite heroic, but in the end, he still has to use Jiang and I, this young girl, as a scapegoat. He really can't protect his reputation. Su Fengnian stood up and said, I'm going out for a walk. Su Jihu worriedly asked, Are you all right? Su Fengnian made a pig's face before Su Jihu let him go. Bluebird did not follow. Su Fengnian walked to the entrance of the courtyard alone. He withdrew his feet and walked into a side room in the courtyard. It was elegant and clean. In the corner of the room, there was a large bookcase. Su Fengnian saw a dozen copper coins scattered messily on the table. After sitting down, he picked them up one by one and held them in the palm of his hand. That year, she had walked into Bailiang Palace alone. Today, she also walked out of the courtyard without a single item. Su Fengnian stacked the copper coins on the table and rested his chin on the table in a daze. He noticed that his chin was a little wet and suddenly came to his senses. He laughed bitterly and then his eyes became firm. He wiped his hand and put away the copper coins. He hurriedly walked out of the room to get the sword case and the horse from the stable. He rode out alone. On the official road, he caught up with Chao Chongqing's carriage. Chao Chongqing slowly stopped the carriage. He did not deliberately make things difficult for His Royal Highness who had spoken disrespectfully. Just riding alone was enough of his sincerity. Chao Chongqing could even kill His Majesty the Emperor. Why would he fuss over the word, scram? If he had not discovered the truth, Chao Guanzi could have slowly ended things. He would not have ended up in this worst-case scenario where both sides were defeated and injured. Chao Guanzi could ignore the eyes of the world, but he was not willing to let Princess Taiping bear a grudge. Su Fengnian waited for Jiang and I to lift the curtain and stick his head out. He handed over the sword case containing the great Liang dragon sparrow and said lightly, This is for you. Her eyes were unfocused. She did not extend her hand and was about to put down the curtain. She did not even look at the red sandalwood sword case. Su Fengnian bent down and placed it behind Chao Chongqing, in front of her. There was also a string of copper coins on the sword case. His Royal Highness smiled and said, I really do not have the habit of carrying silver with me. I will owe you the rest of the copper coins. When you are so poor that you can't even open the pot, come to Bailiang to find me and I will take care of you. Revenge is revenge, they are 2 different things. The little clay man stared at the copper coins on the sword case in a daze, his eyes brightening. The white-haired Chao Chongqing had his back to the 2 people, but he still sighed softly. Su Fengnian looked deeply at Princess Taiping who was still unable to wipe away her tears. He jokingly said, We are about to separate. With Uncle Chess' edict by your side, I am afraid that no one will bully you in the future. Do you want to smile? Jiang and I subconsciously glared, but he could not be fierce and could not smile. Su Fengnian on the horse straightened up. He no longer hesitated and turned the horse around. He urged the horse to move slowly. The horse had only taken a few steps when His Royal Highness pulled the reins and stopped the horse. He said in a deep voice, Chao Chongqing. Chao Guanzi did not need Su Fengnian to speak. He calmly said, Zhao Go is nothing. When the princess was not here, Chao Chongqing allowed them to jump around. This time, I will let them all die. Su Fengnian did not speak anymore. He urged the horse to gallop away. Jiang and I held the sword case and sat back in the carriage. He quietly put a copper coin that was tightly clenched in his palm and covered in sweat together with the other 10. Chao Chongqing murmured, This person is generous. Chapter 266. Because it was a 5,000-word chapter, Uploading was a bit late. Coincidentally, King of Bailiang Su Shao was just about to leave the capital when Great General Gu Jiantang returned from Liao to attend the morning court. Today's morning court was not held in the Hall of Preserving Peace, but rather in the Hall of Cultivating Spirit, which was normally used for holding court. Outside the southern gate, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu led the Zhang faction, the military general of the Ministry of War, the Green faction led by Wen Taiyi and Hong Lingshu, and the old Grand Preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji, who had been silently criticized by the local dignitaries of the Liang dynasty as a servant of two surnames, led the old and new nobles of the 8 countries. Grand Secretary Zhang had always arrived at the court at the right time, neither too early nor too late. Together with the Green factions Wen and Hong, the 2 pillars behind Shang Zhugua Lu Feiqi, they were both old, so under normal circumstances, they would arrive rather late. On the contrary, it was the snow-white-browed Sun Shiji who always arrived outside the Tai and Imperial Gate early, to show that he was an old steed in the stable, but he was used to being taciturn. This old man, who was once known as West Chu's twin jade annulus along with the spring and autumn Marshal Saint Yi Bai Kuei, now occupied a high position in the dynasty, in charge of a province, with the power to rebuke, and the responsibility to admonish. After entering the dynasty, he never retreated, never spoke in general terms. Sun Shiji had a head full of white hair, his skin wrinkled like an old pine tree. His health was not too good. From time to time he would catch a cold in winter and suffer from heat stroke in summer. His Majesty even made an exception for this old official, granting him a seat. However, right now, it looked like old man Sun's spirit was still flourishing. Around him gathered a group of old and new remnants of the 8 countries, all of them about 60 years old. The second generation of new remnants didn't mind openly standing together with the other 3 factions, exchanging polite greetings, talking about some harmless and amusing matters. Sun Shiji raised his head, seeing 2 colleagues walking over from the distance. The old Grand Preceptor's expression was cold. When the civil and military officials all sensed the appearance of these 2, they immediately shut their mouths. One of the 2 wore first-rank embroidered crane civil official robes, purple beard and blue eyes. His figure was tall, his appearance clear and unique, his steps unhurried. The other person was dressed in a first-rank martial official uniform embroidered with a qilin, a pair of long and narrow red phoenix eyes. When he looked at people and things, his eyes would always be narrowed. Not only did he not give others a feeling of elegance and charm, he instead added a bit of gloominess. His steps were firm. This person got off the carriage with Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and walked over together. Perhaps it was because his steps were faster. At first, the 2 walked side by side, but they gradually passed Grand Secretary Zhang by a body's length. However, he still didn't seem to realize that this was inappropriate, directly walking towards Taiyan Gate. Of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, only Great General Gu didn't bother with trifles like this. Gu Jiantang's way of doing things was a bit domineering, but his speech was still respectful. He didn't speak with Gu Party's direct line of descent, instead first greeting Sun Shiji. Old Sun nodded with a smile. The old man didn't have any bad feelings towards this famous general from the spring and autumn period. After all, the ones who destroyed West Chu were Su Rentu and Chen Bai, this pair of adopted father and son. The Imperial Secretariat's Great Yellow Gate was the son of Heaven's inner court officials. This Great Yellow Gate was not a eunuch's Great Yellow Gate. The 2 couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. Only the Imperial Secretariat's Great Yellow Gate was closest to the emperor, not losing out in the slightest to the eunuchs in the palace. Moreover, the Great and Great Yellow Gate's reputation in the scholarly world were all excellent, so they were the most confident in front of the eunuchs, wishing they could seize the opportunity to purge the emperor's side to show their true colors as loyal officials. As a result, they were greatly feared by the eunuchs. As a result, the Imperial Secretariat's Great Yellow Gate status was noble and illustrious. More than 10 of them were popular in the imperial court, but they didn't stand on their own against the 4 factions, and instead dispersed. There was a large disparity in the age of this group. There was no lack of older people like Sun Shiji, and there was a large number of people like Gu Jiantang. The youngest ones were not even 30 years old. One of the newest members of the Big Yellow sect was a foreigner. His reputation was not bad, and his self-made Jean Lanting familiar proclamation was widely praised in the capital. However, under normal circumstances, according to his qualifications and knowledge, he was far from being qualified to enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs as a Yellow Gatekeeper. Even the Little Yellow sect was in danger, let alone the Big Yellow sect. However, for some reason, This kid had been personally recommended by the king of Bailiang. Not long ago, before Su Dajua had arrived in the capital, Jean Lanting's edict to enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs had been quickly sent to the northwest. This was the first official morning court session for the Emperor of Jin Huang. This kid was born in an ordinary noble family, and did not have a strong foundation in the capital. The arrogant officials in the capital also did not like this lucky guy. They could not afford to offend the king of Bailiang. Are you a student of the king of Bailiang? Fine, we won't find trouble with you, but if you want to have a good chat with you, there's no way. So what if you're the new Great Yellow Gate? How many big shots in the capital have been eyeing this position? In the end, a nobody from outside the capital snatched a big piece of fat meat from their bowl. How could they not be angry? Jean Lanting, who had never interacted with the officials in the capital, seemed a little uneasy. He stood alone in the corner, being stared at by the cold eyes all around him, and his body was covered in sweat. The complacency he had when he first entered the capital was swept clean. There was even a casual rider from the nearby Wuxia province who sneered. People say that the northwest barbarians are monkeys wearing hats. I didn't believe it in the past, but now it seems like it's true. Soon after, several other young and strong officials who were colleagues of the Wuxia province, such as the Wuxia province official, laughed and repeated the word, sure enough. This made the isolated and helpless Jean Lanting really want to dig a hole and crawl into it. Jean Lanting now truly felt the xenophobia of the capital's officials. His body was weak, his personality also not that resolute. After suffering this type of grievance that he had never expected to encounter before, his eyes immediately turned completely red, actually showing signs of tears. This even more so provoked the sneers and mockery of some of the officials who were the best at bullying the weak. At this time, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu looked over from the distance. When he saw this scene, he frowned slightly, stopping his steps. Gu Jiantang originally intended for Grand Secretary Zhang to enter the imperial city first, but when he saw the Grand Secretary turn around and walk away, Great General Gu didn't stand on ceremony either, taking the lead to walk through the main gate. The Gu generals naturally followed in a line. Sun Shiji and Green Party's two great consecrators also followed closely behind. In the court, Zhang Party's influence was the greatest, their numbers the most numerous. Before the Grand Secretary entered the city gates, they obviously didn't dare act blindly without thinking. They could only stop where they were, all of them looking towards the Grand Secretary. They looked at each other in dismay, all of them seeing the confusion in each other's eyes. The extremely dignified Zhang Julu arrived at the crestfallen Jean Lanting's side, saying with a gentle smile, Jean Huang Men, a few days ago, I thickened my skin and specially asked Chancellor Huan for a few blades of Lanting Sushuan. That old fellow's heart ached as if he was cutting his own flesh. Only when I returned to the manor and gave it a try did I realize why old man Huan viewed it as his favorite. It really was as light as a cicada's wing, unable to make a sound. If you don't mind, I would like to ask you, the supervisor of Lanting Sushuan, for a few more blades of Sushuan. Jean Lanting raised his head, an expression of disbelief on his face. He mumbled, not daring to say anything. Those officials who were originally waiting to watch a good show slowly dispersed, no longer daring to openly ridicule this outsider who was lucky enough to occupy a high position. Grand Secretary Zhang didn't seem to mind either. He patted Jean Lanting's shoulder, and when he brushed past him, he said indifferently, only a gentleman can avoid cliques and pursue personal interests. Let others laugh today, but there's no harm in seeing who laughs 10 years later. Jean Lanting's legs went soft, almost about to kneel down for that figure. A gentleman would die for his bosom friend. This dynasty's Gaozu established the belt system, from the Son of Heaven to the feudal lords, princes, ministers, as well as third rank and above, they were allowed to use a jade belt. The amount of jade embedded in the belt was also regulated by Ming law. The current dynasty's great pillar state Su Xiao, because of his outstanding military achievements, the late emperor bestowed a white jade belt embedded with 15 pieces of jade. The great general Gu Jiantang received 13 pieces of jade. When it came to the current Son of Heaven, the number of belts bestowed upon him was few and far between. Chen Zhibao, who was publicly revered by the Son of Heaven, was bestowed a purple belt embedded with 12 pieces of jade. After the old Grand Secretary passed away from illness, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu, who had risen more than 10 ranks in 2 years, was bestowed 4 purple belts, one embedded with gold, and the other embedded with jade was 6, 10, 13, increasing in that order. The current dynasty's court uniform belt was inlaid with jade as the most respected material, followed by gold, silver, copper, and iron. Unless the emperor bestowed it specially, it could not exceed the official rank. The standard of a jade belt could not exceed a lightning pool, but it was an ancient custom for gentlemen to love jade. The imperial court didn't forbid the hanging of jade pendants at the waist. Jean Lanting followed the civil and military officials into the city gate. Along the way, jade pendants were knocked, making ding-dong sounds, creating a clear and ethereal sound. Jean Lanting's mind swayed. This was precisely the center of the entire Liang dynasty. Chapter 267. Compared to Lu Daolin's resignation as the right chancellor of the Imperial College, which was approved by the emperor, the entry of the nameless Jean Lanting into the secretariat seemed insignificant. The case of Bailiang's heir-killing of scholars in Gangnam-do immediately caused a huge uproar in the capital where the ears and eyes were the most informed. There were 30,000 imperial scholars in the Imperial College. Their emotions were aroused and they were noisy. Even though they knew that the prince with a different surname was still in the capital, they still couldn't stop the explosive discussion of these future pillars of the dynasty. The Imperial College in Great and City was originally very small, limiting admission to members of the imperial family, relatives, and the descendants of third-rank meritorious officials. It was expanded during the time of the late emperor, adding 5 halls, 6 halls, and 18 floors. When the spring and autumn period ended and the world was unified, the Imperial College completely opened its doors. Now, it already accommodated 30,000 students. The buildings of the Imperial College stretched for 10 miles, magnificent and unprecedented. The Imperial College had 2 chancellors on the left and right, similar to Shangyin Academy. During these years, imperial scholars poured into the Imperial College like carps crossing the river, forming a community of scholars and vaguely showing the majestic atmosphere of competing with the academy. As the right chancellor, Lu Daolin, the head of the Lu family in Yangzhou, had a position only below left chancellor Huan Wen, who was once from the same school as Grand Secretary Zhang. This time, due to the vicious actions of his in-laws in Gangnam-do, his reputation was damaged. He felt that he could no longer be a role model for the 30,000 students of the Imperial College, so he took the initiative to resign. As for whether or not left Chancellor Huan Wen added fuel to the fire, perhaps only Lu Daolin, who was involved in the situation, knew. Lu Daolin had closed his doors and declined visitors these days, making people feel that Chancellor Lu, who had failed miserably this time, was truly disheartened. Lu Daolin sat behind the desk, holding a saint's book. His expression was calm, without a hint of dejection. The head butler walked over quickly and only slowed down when he reached the door. He bowed and said, "Master, de Zhuguo is here to visit." Unexpectedly, Lu Daolin thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Open the middle door." The head butler had a strange expression on his face. Reporting to Master, de Zhuguo said that it was troublesome to open the middle gate, so he went in from the side gate. "He will be here soon." Lu Daolin smiled and shook his head, feeling a little helpless. He stood up and straightened his clothes. Just as he stepped out of the study, he saw a hunchbacked man walking in from the inner corridor. This old man suddenly hugged his neck and laughed as if he was criticizing him. "In-law, oh in-law, you're not being honest. The Demai courier station is only a few steps away from here." "What? Did you insist that I come to see you? Can't you sell me some face? What kind of in-law are you?" One of them was the powerful king of Bailiang, and the other was the former chancellor of the Imperial College. When the two families met, the latter was hugged by the neck and almost couldn't breathe. Fortunately, the chief butler had served the Lu family all his life, so he didn't look away. Lu Daolin, who had a good reputation in the north and south, and who was recognized as having a deep understanding of ancient customs, could only tilt his neck and say helplessly, "De Zhuguo, this is not proper." Su Shao let go and walked into the study with his hands behind his back. Lu Daolin signaled for the chief butler to close the door. Only the in-laws, who were the center of attention, were left in the study. Su Shao sat casually on the chair and asked with a smile, "Suddenly you don't have an official position. Does your heart feel empty?" Lu Daolin smiled. "It's okay." Su Shao waved his hand and said directly, "I won't beat around the bush with you. Just say it. There are 6 ministries in the Ministry of Works. Where do you want to go? Tell me clearly. Of course, you don't have to think about the Ministry of War. Gu Jiantang, that bastard, has always seen it as his wife in his bed. He'll get angry with anyone who goes there. As for the Ministry of Appointments, it's also difficult. Zhang Baiyan's territory is made of iron, so it's almost impossible to get in. As for the Ministry of Justice, it's not suitable for you to go. Ministry of Rights, Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Works. In-law, pick one. Heh, if you want me to leave the capital earlier, you'll have to give me some capital. Although Lu Daolin had this intention long ago, since he couldn't stay in the Imperial College and couldn't compete with Huan for so many years, he might as well find another way. However, no matter what, in the past, the Imperial College's chancellors were the top-notch officials. At the time, the Hall of Governmental Affairs didn't set up provincial magistrates for the two provinces. Even the highly respected Sun Shiji was only a left servant, so the two chancellors became the top-notch officials. Speaking of which, since Lu Daolin had only lost to Huan Wen in the Imperial College these years, he naturally cultivated many of his confidants. It could be said that he had students all over the world. His only regret was that if he went to one of the 6 ministries, he probably wouldn't be able to get the title of Grand Secretary in this lifetime. No matter how open-minded Lu Daolin was, in the end, he couldn't escape the stereotype of a famous scholar. However, this time he took a step back and didn't hurt his heart. His Majesty also hinted that he should enter one of the ministries. Lu Daolin thought that the Ministry of Rights was the most likely place for him to go. He originally felt a little regretful, but when he received a letter from his clan brother, Lu Baijie, saying that he wanted to fight for the position of Assistant Minister of War, Lu Daolin immediately became very happy. In this way, it was the best time to go to the Ministry of Rights. Otherwise, it would touch the bottom line of the other 3 families in Yangzhou. Lu Daolin did not want to complicate things at this time. Anyway, as long as his brother Lu Baijie was willing to be an official, everything would be settled. For the Lu family and the scholars group of Yangzhou, this was a great blessing. There was no one around, so he no longer called Su Shao a pillar of the country. After calling him in-law, Lu Daolin smiled and said implicitly, "Minister Lu is old and unwell." Before the new year, he mentioned to His Majesty that he wanted to retire and return home. Su Shao curled his lips and said straightforwardly, "Then it's settled." Lu Daolin hesitated and said softly, "It's okay if in-law doesn't show up." Su Shao spat and pointed at Lu Daolin's face. He scolded mercilessly, "You pedantic in-law, do you really think that the minister of the 6 ministries is in your pocket? If I don't show up, do you believe that Zhang Baiyan and Sun Shiji can press you to a broken place and not raise your head?" Lu Daolin was shocked. Su Shao shook his head and said with a smile, "In-law, you have read a lot of sages and know a lot of principles. However, being an official is not something that can be done just because you have a little face. I'll say this first, if you still treat the Minister of the Board of Rights as the Chancellor of the Imperial College, you will have to pack your bags and get lost before long." Lu Daolin sighed and said, "I understand." Su Shao waved his hand and smiled. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Feng Yin is messing around on Gongnam-do and has caused your family to lose the foundation of the Imperial College. Are you angry?" Lu Daolin said seriously, "It would be hypocritical to say that I'm not angry. However, to be honest, His Royal Highness is angry about this matter. If a family member doesn't help a family member, no matter how big the family business is, it will be ruined. This is a principle that even a country bumpkin understands. Lu Daolin understands." Lu Daolin then said with a guilty expression, "I have already written a letter to Xian Lang. In the future, he can't let his emotions affect his decisions." Su Shao opened his eyes and stood up. He said slowly, "In-law, this is what a family member should say." Lu Daolin felt relieved. He looked at Su Zhao's posture and saw that he was about to leave as soon as he sat down. He said in surprise, "In-law, are you leaving?" Su Shao said unhappily, "If I don't leave, am I supposed to talk to you in a bureaucratic manner? I'm leaving. Back to Bailiang." Lu Daolin was speechless. When Su Shao walked out of the study, he laughed softly and said, "Don't worry about His Majesty being suspicious of you and me. The law is nothing more than human feelings. Since we are in-laws, we have to act like in-laws. If we are unfamiliar with each other, we are worse than outsiders and enemies. Only then will people not understand. Only when they don't understand will they blindly think about it. That's right, right?" Lu Daolin, who had been gloomy in his heart, was completely relieved. The king of Bailiang came and went in a hurry. What Lu Daolin didn't know was that Princess Xueqi was sitting in the carriage outside the manor. She was on a private visit. After Su Xiao sat in the carriage, the princess pulled on his sleeve and said with a sad face, "Uncle Su, can you not leave the capital? Xiaoya is so bored." Su Xiao smiled and said, "There's no other way. Uncle has a busy life. How about I have Feng Nian come to the capital to play with you?" Princess Xueqi's eyes rolled around. Su Xiao rubbed her head and said, "Look, you still have a grudge in your heart, don't you? All right, Uncle can only take out his trump card and take you to eat a few big bowls of almond tofu. When the time comes, Uncle won't be happy if you're angry with Feng Nian." The princess shook the cuffs of the big pillar of the kingdom like a spoiled child and snorted twice. She smiled brightly and said, all right. For Uncle Su's sake, I won't lower myself to that guy's level." On this day, he and Princess Xueqi ate a bowl of almond tofu that cost 3 copper coins. According to the history books, this was the last time the king of Bailiang, Su Xiao, entered or left the capital. After the king of Bailiang, who was still wearing the clothes of a rich man, left the city, he walked out of the carriage and looked at the towering city wall with his hands in his sleeves. Beside him stood the sickly tiger in black, Yang Taisui. Su Xiao sighed and said, "Bald donkey Yang, after today, we probably won't see each other again in this lifetime, right?" The state preceptor nodded woodenly. Su Xiao smiled and said, "Whoever dies last, remember to go to the grave and offer wine on the tomb." Yang Taisui said calmly, "I'm poor and can't afford good wine, so I'll definitely die first. It's a profit." Su Xiao reached out and rubbed the state preceptor's bald head and said, You're not even willing to suffer a small loss in your life. It's a loss to be your brother." The two who had overturned 8 countries while chatting and laughing parted just like that. The old monk in black stood in place and watched the carriage go away. He rubbed his bald head and finally lowered his head and put his palms together. The only person in the world who could make this old monk bow his head willingly was Su Xiao of Bailiang. Chapter 268. Among the 36 palaces of Wudong, the Taishu Temple on the Big Lotus Peak was the tallest. Its eaves were called Daijing Jiao. It was famous because of the sword that once belonged to the immortal Lu Dongxian. At this time, a young Taoist wearing a different robe from Wudong was sitting near Lu Dongshuan's sword. There was a long ladder under his feet. The elegant Taoist was carrying a wooden bucket and repainting the mottled eaves of Daijing Jiao. It was Xianxia from the celestial master residence of Longhu Mountain. Looking around, the clouds were rolling and the wind was blowing. The 72 peaks of Wudong were like a celestial island on the sea. Xianxia was in a daze for a moment as he heard the melodious sound of the morning bell on the mountain. These days, he lived on Wudong Mountain and wanted to defeat the leader of Wudong who rode the green ox. He rarely fought. Most of the time, he was forced to fight with the cowardly Taoist. Unintentionally, he also benefited a lot. When he heard that Daijing Jiao needed to be painted, he thought that there was a celestial sword here that he had been fascinated by since he was young. He promised the lazy Hong to do the work. Xianxia never cared about these details and was not afraid of being criticized by the celestial master residents. Thinking of this, Xianxia was a little absent-minded. Wudong Mountain was really different from the celestial master residents. They did not compete with others. Occasionally, there were disputes, but Xianxia did not care about them. He just tilted his head and glanced at Lu Dongshuan's sword. The name of the sword could not be verified. There was no record of it in the ancient books of Taoism. There were only some rumors in the streets. Privately, they gave the celestial sword some names like Dragon Slayer or Green Sky. It sounded very imposing. Xianxia certainly did not believe it. However, it was true that this celestial sword did not have a scabbard. Lu Dongxian once said, "Only heaven and earth can make the sword robe of this sword." The sword robe was the scabbard. But now, the ancient sword had a peachwood scabbard. Xianxia remembered this and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Some time ago, he asked the leader with the surname Hong. That guy hesitantly told the truth. Only then did Xianxia know that Hong made the scabbard for the celestial sword when he was young. As for the reason, the young leader refused to say it even if he was beaten to death. If it was in the celestial master mansion, Immortal Lu's relics would have long been hidden in the main hall and enshrined with layers of talismans. Not to mention adding a scabbard without permission, it would be difficult to even see it. Taking 10,000 steps back, if he really wanted to find a sword room for the immortal sword, He would at least need a python's skin and tendon to match his identity. Wudong Mountain had too few rules. Xianxia lowered her head to look. The one with the surname Hong was practicing a fist technique. Behind this young chief, there were close to 100 Wudong Taoists who practiced fist techniques. They were both young and old. At first, the ones who practiced with the bull riding martial arts were just little Taoists who thought it was fun. Over time, the older generation of Taoists smelled the ancient charm of the martial arts. Twice a day, during the morning bell and evening drum, they would voluntarily come to the Taishu temple to practice with them. The bull riding martial arts started with a plain momentum and was purely natural. In general, the martial arts were big circles within small circles, big circles within small circles, like a silkworm spinning silk continuously. Xianxia had never seen this set of boxing style. Later, when it was mentioned, she knew that it was created by Hong, who watched the bells and drums on the mountain all year round. Although Xianxia had been practicing swordsmanship since young, she naturally knew what was good and what was good. This boxing style accumulated thousands of caddies, pulling a big frame like covering the sky and earth. When it entered a small frame, it was like a mustard seed containing Mount Sumeru. Not to mention the actual combat effect, the most important thing was the concept. To be honest, Xianxia was somewhat jealous of this guy's talent. On the square, the young leader slowly retracted his fist. The rest of the Taoists' movements were the same. They were already 20 to 30% similar. An old Taoist came forward to ask for advice from the leader. As he spoke, he praised that if one practiced this boxing style for a long time, they would be able to walk on ice in the abyss without moving, like a mountain hitting the water in the middle of the river. The young leader listened without blushing or being proud. He laughed and said that it was nothing. The old Taoist was worried and said that if this set of boxing style could be learned by everyone on the mountain, it was hard to guarantee that it would not be secretly learned by outsiders. The leader shook his head and smiled, saying that it was not a problem. This set of boxing style was good at nourishing one's body and mind. If more people learned it, Wudong would have more merit. The old Taoist smiled and no longer worried about groundless things. So what if the leader was young? With this kind of breadth of mind, when had he ever lost to the mansion of the celestial master? When Hong Xixiang saw Xianxia carrying the wooden bucket down the ladder, he ran over to help him take the wooden bucket. They went down the mountain together and walked side by side towards the little lotus peak. When some of the disciples on the square saw this, they felt proud. Look, what's wrong with the little celestial master? Isn't he still subdued by our leader? Xianxia did not care about these little thoughts. On the way down the mountain, Hong Xixiang led the green ox. It was still leisurely hanging on one of its horns. The other horn was hanging on the wooden bucket. It was swaying and looked very comical. He smiled and said, "When I was practicing the boxing style, I felt a trace of resonance between you and the ancient sword. When you leave Wudong one day, let me know and I'll give you the sword. If you feel embarrassed, I'll just lend it to you." Xianxia was not happy but angry. He reprimanded, "Ancestor Lu's relic is the weapon of your Wudong for 500 years. How can you treat it as child's play and give it away just like that?" Hong Xixiang did not care and said, "Didn't I say that I'll lend it to you?" Xianxia snorted coldly, "Don't mention this again." Hong Xixiang said with emotion, "His Royal Highness is still the most daring. When we went down the mountain, if it wasn't for me hugging his leg and begging him, you wouldn't have seen this sword." Xianxia was indifferent to this. He only said sincerely, "Outside the box, the world is full. Inside the box, the sword aura is long. Ancestor Lu's style in the past can be seen." Hong Xixiang muttered, Ancestor Lu had warned the emperor to take care of his own fate and not to disturb the emperor's path of governance through internal and external alchemy. Since ancient times, the necromancers caused disasters and caused national disasters. It was all because the traveling immortals entered the imperial court and cultivated for the sake of benefits. How is this true cultivation? It's more like cultivation. Just like your martial uncle Zhao Danping who preached in the capital, he participated in the imperial court's affairs. I heard that he wrote memorials to the Heavenly Lord with beautiful words. Therefore, he was called Scholar Qing Ci by the people in the capital. Isn't this great celestial master ashamed? Because he was favored, I don't know how many Taoists and necromancers wanted to rely on this path to achieve a meteoric rise. It's not necessarily not a disaster for the orthodoxy. Chapter 269. Xianxia was probably concerned about the Venerable's taboo. Even though he disagreed with the Longhu celestial master Zhao Dongping's actions, his expression remained calm and he did not comment. Hong Xixiang brought Xianxia to the hut where the crown prince of Beiliang used to practice his swordsmanship. The vegetable garden outside the hut was full of greenery. This year, he was the one taking care of it. He picked a cucumber, wiped away the thorns and put it into his mouth. The young chief sighed again and again. He thought of the slender girl who carried him up the mountain. He thought of the sword will that senior brother Wang praised under the big gung horn. Regarding the grudges between His Royal Highness and her, as an outsider, he felt like he was looking at flowers in a fog. If someone said that His Royal Highness did not care about her, Hong Xixiang would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. His Royal Highness had suffered many times because of that unreasonable maidservant. The girl at the foot of the mountain was his mother. Hong Xixiang looked up at the sky and muttered, "This Princess Taiping is really not living a peaceful life." Xianxia stood outside the vegetable garden and looked at the young chief who was sighing. He asked, "When do you plan to leave the mountain?" Hong Xixiang said helplessly, "I don't dare." Xianxia said calmly, "You dare to give Ancestor Lu's sword to an outsider, but you don't dare to leave the mountain?" Hong Xixiang was silent and cowardly as usual. Xianxia sneered, "Afraid of ruining the black tortoise's prosperity? Afraid of letting down the ancestors and senior brothers on the mountain?" Hong Xixiang shook his head and said, "No." Xianxia turned and left, leaving behind a sentence. "Are you going to the debate on the peak of Mount Longhu?" Hong Xixiang lowered his head and pinched his fingers, saying, "Allow me to calculate." Xianxia sneered, "Calculate what? No matter how you calculate, you won't leave the mountain. Why deceive yourself?" The young chief, who was so good-tempered that it made people gasp in amazement, said softly, "Bullsh*t." Xianxia laughed and left. Beiliang's frontier fortress. The huge town was heavily guarded and the cavalry was valiant. On this day, a sandstorm suddenly rose. It could be said that a river of crushed stones was as big as a bucket. Looking out from the city wall, all one could see was dust, giving off the desolation that was unique to a frontier fortress. But in this kind of chaos, there was still a man in white who went out of the city. Beside him was a graceful woman with a black veil covering her face. The man in white was leading the horse, and his posture was very, very low. It was really hard to tell which of the 6 major towns on the border was worthy of this honor. The woman's temperament was otherworldly. She held a pipa in her arms and faced the storm. Looking into the distance, one could see a tornado soaring into the sky. She sat on the horse and said softly in a clear voice, "You openly allowed the enemy of Beimang to leave the city. Aren't you afraid that the king of Beiliang will have a grudge against your adopted son?" The man in white continued to lead the horse forward slowly, remaining calm and collected. Wherever they went, the wind and sand would not be able to enter. The woman, who wore a black muslin dress but a pair of snow-white embroidered shoes, also fell silent. The man in white finally said, "Chen Jibao only knows that the first player of Beimang's horse drum, Fan Bai, has entered the city, but he doesn't know that Princess Qingwan of Beimang has left the city." The woman in black dress and white embroidered shoes said with a smile, "How can Slave Bai dare to be called the first player? Sun Zigong's right hand is strong and fierce, like an iron horse rushing out. Zhu Qingshan's left hand presses the string to Tongxian. Big and small pearls fall on a jade plate. Only then can he be considered a master of the pipa." The man smiled faintly and said, "It's true that these two are good at playing, but the pattern is monotonous. They can't be compared to Miss Fan's own composition and music." The woman with a veil covering her face turned to look at the man in white. This master of the art of war who made her risk her life to enter Beiliang's territory did not act according to common sense. Her trip to Beiliang, which had a clear goal, was forcefully dragged into an ambiguous situation by him. She gritted her teeth and said in a low voice, "General, Slave Bai can guarantee you a place in Beimang in the future. It will only be higher than the Liang dynasty." Chen Jibao shook his head slightly and said, "That's boring." The woman with a special identity frowned and said, "General, are you sure Beimang will lose? Will you be able to make contributions that are not inferior to the spring and autumn war? The Beiliang cavalry can be said to be invincible, but because of the restrictions of the imperial court, they have not been able to display their full strength for the past 20 years. However, if you enter Beimang and take control of the military, I can guarantee that you will have no scruples." Is there anything more interesting in the world than being enemies with the Bailiang cavalry? Once Bailiang is pacified, you can go straight south. With Gu Jiantang, the king of Yan, and the king of Guangling, and the Spring and Autumn War, won't you be able to reverse the situation with your strength alone? You must know that the ambition of the Emperor of Beimang is far greater than that of the Emperor of the Zhao family. The white-robed Chen Zhibao seemed unmoved. He smiled and said, "When did Miss Fan learn how to make empty promises?" The woman was angry at first, then overjoyed. However, she did not strike while the iron was hot. She lowered her head and reached out to play the strings of the pipa. Suddenly, the silver bottle broke like silk. Her voice was sonorous as she softly sang, "Young men fly away on horseback when they are 15. Can't go back. Yellow sand rolls and stones roll. Riding alone. All my life I have been spirited. Today I have been spirited. Today I have been spirited. Iron clothes like snow, war drums beat. When will the white-robed tyrant return? When will he return?" Chen Zhibao heard this and dismissed it with a laugh. The woman put away the pipa and the sound of metal and stone stopped. She smiled and said, "Perhaps I am destined to be a general in this life. But to be able to meet you on the battlefield, I was born at the right time." Chen Zhibao nodded and let go of the reins. The woman did not pretend to be sentimental. She lowered her eyebrows and said softly, "Since you are not willing to make a decision for the time being, I will wait for you to take control of the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry." Chen Zhibao laughed and said, "Miss Fan, you are thinking too much." The woman did not refute. She bent down and reached out as if she wanted to touch Chen Bai's cheek. Chen Zhibao did not dodge, but she retracted her hand without touching him. She straightened her back and did not dare to look him in the eye. She turned her head and said bitterly, "General, please forgive me for being rude." Beimang had 3 pipa hands, Sun Zigong had his right hand, and Zhu Qingshan had his left hand. In the end, they were not inferior to Fan Bainu's hands. Chen Zhibao smiled and patted the horse's butt. He did not send her off. The horse galloped away. Chen Bai, whose heart was as calm as still water, turned his head and squinted at the flag with the word "Su" on the city wall. He was lost in thought. Liyang Dragon, Bailiang Python, Beimang Flood Dragon, Bai Yi could be killed together. Who was the one who said such an evil prophecy? Huang Longshi? Little did he know that Huang Sanjia, who was full of nonsense and revealed the heavenly secret, was dozens of miles away, forcing a poor ranger to chase after the tornado and practice his swordsmanship. Chen Zhibao walked back to the border city expressionlessly. Chapter 270. Everyone knew that there was a saying in Zhenzhou, "Jiangxi's dragon and tiger, Jiangdong's Shenyuan." Zhenzhou was split into 2 by the Xi River. Jiangxi had dragon and tiger, while Jiangdong had Shenyuan. The former was the ancestral court of Taoism. The Zhao family of Taoism, which had the same surname as the emperor, had been hereditary for more than 60 generations. They had received the will of heaven and guarded the world for 1,600 years. The Dragon and Tiger Mountain, which had a radius of 100 miles, was the base of the Taoist sect, with the Taoist master mansion as the core. The confrontation between the peaks was like a battle between a dragon and a tiger. The mountain was red and the water was green. Purple qi rose. It was a beautiful scene. In a broad sense, the Dragon and Tiger Mountain was even more vast. To the west of the Xi River, almost half of it belonged to this Taoist immortal capital. Together with the Zhang family in the north, which had produced a saint master, they were known as Northern Zhang and Southern Zhao. The master of the north and the immortal south had been shining together for thousands of years. The master and disciple walked out of a dilapidated Taoist temple at the foot of Mount Longhu and boarded a bamboo raft to float down. The sloppy old Taoist with a pole was spitting saliva everywhere as he introduced the local customs of Zhenzhou to his silly disciple who was leaning on the bamboo raft to catch fish. Let's not talk about our Mount Longhu. Since Shenyuan can stand shoulder to shoulder with Mount Longhu in Zhenzhou, it is really not simple. Although unfortunately, it is located in the same province as our Taoist ancestral court, it has been only slightly inferior for hundreds of years. What is even more rare is that this family does not become an official. In times of chaos, you can cause chaos, and in times of peace, you can maintain peace, but I have always been alone with my family and never moved. It is strange to say that Shenyuan only travels in Jianghu, and there are many masters in Jianghu. It is said that there is an immortal jade seal at the bottom of the Mount Longhu in Jiangxi that is inscribed with the words, "By the will of heaven." It's not that I am deliberately biased and want to slander Xianyuan. Anyway, when I was young, I asked my ancestor whether there was a jade seal at the foot of the mountain. My ancestor also said that heaven and earth knew, but he didn't know. I think it's hard to say. Therefore, Xuanyuan's tablet is also a myth. Jiangdong Xianyuan is not a Taoist sect, but it occupies half of Mount Hui. Therefore, it has the sixth blessed land of heavenly abode. I used to go there to enjoy the scenery when I was free. The scenery is not bad at all, especially the main peak of Bull Hill. It is a huge bluestone shaped like a bull lying quietly in the sky. There are 6 waterfalls at the foot of the mountain. Every summer, thousands of carps jump upstream. TSK, it is very spectacular. It is similar to the tide-listening lake in Bailiang Palace. At the same time, because there is a saying that there is a dragon king imprisoned at the bottom of the lake, it is also called the Dragon Gate or the Gate of Heaven. The sword god Li Chungang once reversed the flow of the 6 waterfalls with one sword. Even the gate of Xuanyuan's mansion built on the Bull Hill was destroyed by the flood. Li Chungang is known as the Gate of Heaven because of this. The kung fu of this generation's master of Xianyuan should not be weak. It is hard to say whether he is Xianyuan or celestial phenomenon. However, when he competed with others with swords, sabers, and internal energy, he lost 3 rounds in a row. It is really sad and lamentable. There is no other way. He can only blame his bad luck. How could he not lose when he competed with Li Chungang at the peak of the mountain? Later on, it was even worse. Gu Zhentang, who was still a nobody at that time, fought his way to the Bull Mound. Old man Xianyuan, who had only abandoned his sword for 10 years, lost by 1.5 moves. In the end, it was even more laughable. The old man simply abandoned his weapon. Seeing that Qi Xuanzhen was about to ascend to immortality, he recklessly came to Mount Longhu to compete with Qi Xuanzhen in terms of internal energy. At first, Qi Xuanzhen ignored him, but the old man kept pestering him and stayed on the mountain peak for half a year. He deserved it. However, the old man has lived a lifetime of bad luck. In the end, his sons and grandsons are all quite promising. His only 2 sons and grandsons are too bad. They don't have the slightest bit of immortal aura. They are arrogant and lack manners. They like to humiliate others and can't tolerate the mistakes of others. Their yin and yang are not compatible. No matter how high their kung fu is, they will have to obediently bow their heads when they meet a perfected one of the orthodoxies. That old man Xianyuan is indeed a man who knows how to enjoy his life. He doesn't know shame at all, and the longer he lives, the more backward he gets. When he has nothing to do, he would engage in dual cultivation with women who are young enough to be his granddaughter or great-granddaughter. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its own cubs. The old man, on the other hand, has ruined most of the outstanding women in his family. The good ones are kept as his exclusive property, and the slightly inferior ones are sent out to be married off. It's really a pity that the women of the Xianyuan family are born beautiful, but those aristocratic families who want to marry the Xianyuan family's women are happy instead of being angry. I can't understand this. The old Taoist who was manning the raft squatted down and drank some water. He suddenly looked up and found that his disciple had unknowingly peed at the head of the raft. The old Taoist's wrinkled face was bitter. He hurriedly spat out the sweet and clear stream water and scolded jokingly, "You naughty disciple!" The raft went straight down the Qinglong stream, first converging into the Huishan Dragon King River and then the Xi River. The old Taoist looked up and saw a 2-story ship going up the stream. He didn't need to think to know that it was someone from Xuanyuan's side. Only this family dared to come to Mount Longhu. A 2-story ship was the limit of the Qinglong stream. If it was bigger and higher, it would be stranded. Ordinary scholars and poets who wanted to explore secluded places could only borrow a small raft from the fishermen in the Dao district. There were 3 ways to tour Mount Longhu, and they were all very particular. The doppelganger's mind wandered 3 ways, and the body wandered the most tiring. Although it was possible to climb the mountain and overlook the whole ancestral court, the midway view was only 20 to 30%. The mind wander was better. It could take a few cableways and the view could reach up to 50 to 60%. The mind wander was the best. First, one would take a raft around the Green Mountain, then climb up the steps of Yunjin Mountain, and then pass through the cableway cage hanging between the 2 main peaks to reach Mount Longhu. One could see the whole Dao capital at a glance. Generally speaking, if one wanted to wander around Mount Longhu, without a strong family background, it was impossible to imagine. In these years, Those who could enter the Taoist master mansion to drink tea and talk about Tao were mostly brought there by the rich Shen Yuan. Mount Longhu and Shen Yuan had been neighbors for hundreds of years. It was said that a close neighbor was better than a distant relative. In the past, Su Renta trampled the good Jianghu into a foul atmosphere with his iron hooves. In the end, he didn't even let Mount Longhu go. Only the Shen Yuan family dared to come and help. This was a huge favor, so the Taoist master mansion naturally remembered it. No matter how much Zhao Shituan disliked the old guy Shen Yuan, he couldn't say anything. Su Longxiang, who looked yellow and thin, continued to lie on the bamboo raft to catch fish. He caught and released them again and again, and it was endless fun. The old Taoist Zhao Shituan looked up and saw a few young men and women standing at the bow of the boat. The woman recognized them. They were the treasure of the Shen Yuan family. Since young, she had been fond of slingshots. Her father, Shen Yuan Pihua, spoiled her very much. He used gold to make pills and gave it to his daughter. Every time she went hunting in the spring and autumn, she would always shoot out dozens of golden pills. She treated gold like dirt. When the children of River East heard that Shen Yuan Fairy was going out, they would follow her in large numbers. They would only wait for the golden pills to fall to the ground and snatch them. She never took them back. The woman was slender. She was wearing a narrow-sleeved robe and a white rhinoceros belt, which was no different from the men's attire. She was completely different from the wide sleeves that aristocratic women nowadays liked. If she didn't wrap a silk ribbon around her forehead with a large quality pearl, which added a bit of femininity, coupled with her handsome appearance, she would be regarded as a handsome and luxurious child. She was dressed even more casually on Mount Huishan, which was like the temporary residence of the Shen Yuan family. Her clothes were even more casual. Chapter 271. She came from a great clan of the dynasty, but she had a very grassy aura about her. She would often wander the Jianghu with her servants. Most of the members of the Shen Yuan family had strange names, and she was no exception. The woman's name was Qing Feng. Almost all the women of the Shen Yuan family were beautiful, and each had their own merits. They did not follow the same rigid pattern. Every time a child was born in the Jian province, there would be a custom of drawing lots. Shen Yuan Qing Feng did not pick the rouge and powder, but a small jade sword instead. She was worthy of the name her family gave her. Two young men stood beside Shen Yuan Qing Feng. The one on the left was a handsome woman with red lips and a graceful figure. He stood with his hands behind his back, making him stand out from the crowd. The one on the right of Shen Yuan Qing Feng had a broad forehead, a broad face, a strong body, and a bear's waist. Interestingly, he had a baby's face, which made him even more unforgettable. His eyes, in particular, shone brightly. With Zhao Shituan's insight as both an inner alchemist and a qi practitioner, he could tell with a single glance that this child's inner force was extraordinary. If he had the opportunity, he would be able to step into the first rank that martial practitioners of the Jianghu could only dream of. This child wore a heavy saber in the style of 100 swords. It gave off a sharp and unyielding aura. Zhao Shituan frowned. What a powerful killing aura. Could it be that he had developed his saber technique from killing? Let alone outsiders, even most of the people on Mount Longhu could not recognize the grand heavenly master Zhao Shituan. This was especially true for the past 20 years, as this old Taoist who looked the least like a heavenly master of the Zhao family had never interacted with Shen Yuan Kong naturally. Shen Yuan Qing Feng would not recognize him. The bamboo raft and the ship brushed past each other on the stream. Shen Yuan Qing Feng was as arrogant as the men in his family. He ignored the sloppy old Taoist and the skinny youth. The young, elegant Confucian kept looking at the top of Yunjin Peak. He was full of poetry, as if he was going to write 100 poems if he opened his mouth. Only the young man with the saber narrowed his eyes and looked at the master and disciple pair. The corner of his mouth curled up. Zhao Shituan, who was holding the pole, grinned in response. Shen Yuan Qing Feng glanced at the Song clan's young phoenix beside him, a little dazed. This person was undoubtedly outstanding. His grandfather, Song Guanhai, could be said to be well-versed in Zen theory, good at appraising and storing, good at poetry, good at calligraphy, and good at ink painting. There was nothing he didn't know. When he was young, he spent a lot of money to study and find a master. Any one of Song Guanhai's master was a famous person. He learned from the great spiritual master of the northern lands, Yang Jian. His master was Huang Juwang. Song Guanhai studied hard and was knowledgeable. After the unification of the spring and autumn period, he was ordered to compile the complete book of 9 pavilions. The book was vast and complicated, with 200 volumes. It took 15 years. The emperor was very pleased and granted Song Guanhai the right to ride a horse in the imperial college. Originally, it was expected that Song Guanhai would be transferred to the Minister of Rites. Unexpectedly, he was replaced by the former Right Chancellor of the Imperial College. Song Guanhai was transferred to the more noble Imperial College. As the older generation of literary giants gradually withered away, Song Guanhai became the undisputed leader of the literary world. In recent years, he began to do 15 reviews. On the 15th of every month, he would review the scholars of the world. It was very popular for a time. Once Song Guanhai personally reviewed the questions, the scholar's value would increase by 100 times. All the scholars who reviewed the books regarded Song Guanhai as their teacher. His grandfather was already so noble, but his father, Song Zhiqiu, had the tendency to surpass his father. His calligraphy was known as the divine work of calligraphy. Taking the Imperial College as an example, half of the students wrote in the Song style. Song Guanhai's greatest work was to compare the calligraphy of the North and South sects of Zen. Although it was suspected that he was blindly raising the status of the Academy's painting, he gained a lot of popularity among the northern scholars. Song Zhiqiu took the lead in defining the realm of calligraphy with the rhyme, meaning and spirit. He said, "The rhyme of the word shu is the middle grade. The meaning of the word yu is the top grade. The meaning of the word chu is the first grade. And our dynasty values the spirit, so it is the divine work." When this was said, the Song family naturally made the emperor, who often copied the Song style in private, happy again. He promoted Song Zhiqiu to the Ministry of Rites as the Right Assistant Minister and gave him the title of scholar. People couldn't help but think that if Song Guanhai could live for another 20 years, when Huanwen gave up the position of Left Chancellor, wouldn't the 2 chancellors of the Imperial College be in the pockets of the father and son of the Song family? The Song family had established themselves as a wealthy family in just 2 generations. With such a grandfather and father, how could this young phoenix of the Song family besides Shenyuan Qingfeng be a mediocre person? Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't help but glance to the other side. If the young phoenix, Song Kelly, was the son of a first-class family, then the man of the same age with the blade was the other extreme. He was born poor in the marketplace, and by chance, he became a bandit. He unintentionally obtained half of a blade manual and self-taught himself. He had fought countless battles with his life hanging by a thread, but he managed to carve out a future for himself. Later, he was chosen by a blade grandmaster and was accepted as his last disciple. However, his sect was destroyed soon after. He endured the humiliation and went into seclusion for 3 years, killing a second rank with his third rank strength and killing 62 people from his enemy's clan. He obtained a secret manual, and his realm increased greatly, and his blade technique was close to perfection. Last year, this person came to Mount Hui and stood in the snow for a day and a night to learn superior blade techniques. His family didn't allow him to, but he was allowed to stay on the mountain. He then practiced the blade alone at the 6-layered waterfall. His character was extremely cold and tenacious. Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't say whether he was angry or happy about this person who was called ambitious by the great ancestor, but he couldn't bring himself to dislike him. He came to Mount Longhu this time to sightsee and relax, and also to catch a few rare spiritual beasts that were unique to Mount Longhu. With him around, he could save a lot of effort. It was summer. Although Mount Longhu was cool and refreshing, the pampered Shenyuan Qingfeng still returned to the ship. Frogs in the well couldn't talk about the sea, and summer insects couldn't talk about the ice. The House of Bell and Cauldron food was not like this. Just like the northern Liang prince's mansion had a large lake where one could listen to the tide, this ship had 4 large barrels. They were filled with ice that was stored during the winter and would be taken out during the summer. The room was as cool as autumn. After Shenyuan Qingfeng sat down, he looked at the elegant Song Kelly and smiled. "Young Master Song, you've escorted your master's coffin several thousand miles south. This is a good deed." Song Kelly shook his head. "That's how it should be." The young man with the saber, who was sitting with his eyes closed, raised the corner of his mouth slightly. There was a hint of mockery in it. Shenyuan Qingfeng was born with a cold temperament. Even when he got along with Song Kelly, he didn't try to curry favor with him. He stopped the pleasantries and looked out the window at the beautiful scenery. For some reason, he thought of a pair of bastards from a few years ago. He frowned slightly. He had long forgotten about those two bastards. It was just that he met Xueqi, the son of an aristocratic family. Now, he realized that one of the two bastards was even more beautiful than Xueqi. 2 or 3 years ago, when he was traveling in Mianzhou, he met two shabbily dressed lechers at the lantern market. One of them was good-looking, but very perverted. The other was unremarkable. Shenyuan Qingfeng only vaguely remembered that he had a funny wooden sword. They met on a narrow road in the Mianzhou lantern market. The beggar who looked like a human and dog blocked the road and refused to let her pass. His smile was very repulsive, and his eyes were fixed on her chest. They started a verbal argument. She didn't expect the one with the wooden sword to be a madman. He called a dog by the roadside, "Dad," several times, then turned around and called her Mom. There was also an old man who was watching the fun. He was missing his front teeth, so when he opened his mouth, his smile was very frivolous. Shenyuan Qingfeng had never suffered such humiliation before. He immediately ordered his servants to chase after them and beat them up several streets. His original intention was to break 6 of the dog's legs to vent his anger. However, he didn't expect the two bastards to be carried away by the old man with the missing front teeth. The most damnable thing was that before he disappeared, he shouted, "Little girl, remember that my surname is Su. Just you wait, next time you see me, give me a rabbit-sucking brush." Shenyuan Qingfeng gritted his teeth and thought, "Su, don't let me meet you in Jianzhou." Chapter 272. Shenyuan Qingfeng's group entered Yunjin Mountain and chose a secluded path to search for spiritual items. Apart from the young phoenix of the Song family and the young man with the saber, the Shenyuan family also had a dozen or so elite retainers. Mount Longhu was the ancestral home of Taoism, so naturally, no one dared to cause trouble here. Shenyuan Qingfeng was born in a martial arts family, so his foundation was not bad. However, it was still difficult for him to walk along the rocky beach. Xueqi, the well-read Confucian scholar, was unexpectedly relaxed and leisurely. He stepped on the rocks and crossed the stream with great agility, as if he had returned to his original state after practicing superior internal strength. This made the young sabresman stop looking down on him and carefully observe him with cold eyes. They walked for 4 hours before they realized it. Shenyuan Qingfeng was looking for 3 spiritual items. First, the giant salamander. Giant salamanders weren't rare, but the horns on the forehead were. The second was the red-backed salamander, and the third was the black-footed snow civet. The latter two were relatively easy to find, but the giant salamander was hard to find. According to the ancient books, the salamander would grow horns if it lived for 100 years, and in another 500 years, it would transform into a mountain flood dragon. Shenyuan Qingfeng didn't expect to find it in one go, but she had already searched the mountain dozens of times. While resting on a rock, Xueqi looked at the sky and smiled. "Miss Shenyuan, if we don't go back now, we'll have to spend the night on the mountain." Shenyuan Qingfeng nodded. They didn't get much from this trip, only catching a few salamanders. As for the black-footed snow civet, they didn't see any of them. This was reasonable. These little guys usually only appeared at night. They looked like foxes, but they had a natural musk. They would be the best if they were made into boudoir sachets. However, the process of collecting musk was very bloody and cruel. Shenyuan Qingfeng played with the cute salamander in the glass bottle, thinking that it was time to go home. At this moment, the silent young swordsman squinted his eyes and looked into the depths of the forest. Another 5 miles. Xueqi smiled gently and didn't say anything. Shenyuan Qingfeng looked at the swordsman who spoke confidently. She remembered her father saying that this swordsman's intuition was rare. She thought about it and nodded. "Then let's go another 5 miles. Shenyuan Qingfeng didn't forget to look at Xueqi. "Young Master Song, how is it?" "I can still walk." Xueqi smiled. Shenyuan Qingfeng stood up and took a deep breath before leading the way. When Shenyuan Qingfeng was about to turn around and leave the mountain, he saw a small green pond in the distance. Although the pond was not big, it was obviously very deep. What was even stranger was that there was a middle-aged Taoist sitting cross-legged beside the pond with his back facing everyone. Xueqi furrowed his brows. The young swordsman, sneered. Shenyuan Qingfeng wasn't worried that bad people would appear in Mount Longhu, not to mention that the dozen or so people around her were all powerful. She was even more at ease. She lightly leaped over a few large rocks in the stream and came to a stop near the small pond. Only then did she see that the Taoist wearing the Mount Longhu Taoist robe had an ordinary face. The robe was sewn and could only be considered simple and clean. It wasn't the humble yellow and purple that could best show off the identity of the Taoist master's residence. Shenyuan Qingfeng was meticulous. When she leaped onto the blue stone with the clear spring, she deliberately increased her pace. However, the middle-aged Taoist didn't notice it immediately. The Taoist was focused on the pond. He held a bamboo fishing rod in his hand, as if he was fishing. The bamboo pole was long enough to sink into the pond. It wasn't like those distinguished scholars who were deliberately mystifying. Shenyuan Qingfeng was really tired of those scholars who fished for fame. If this Taoist threw out his fishing rod but didn't have any bait, with Miss Xuanyuan's temperament, she would definitely give him a good beating. There was a bamboo basket next to the Taoist, in which several fragrant vermilion fruits were placed. Shenyuan Qingfeng smiled. "Did I disturb your fishing?" The middle-aged Taoist smiled and shook his head. "Don't worry. You won't disturb the fish I'm trying to catch." Xueqi glanced around and sat down before asking in a warm voice, "May I know what you're using as bait? How deep is this pond?" The young swordsman was already holding the handle of his sword. Even Shenyuan Qingfeng could sense the killing intent of this boorish man, who was expected to compete with Gu Jiantang in the future. He was always straightforward when he set his mind on something. He was like this when he went to Mount Hui, and he was still like this when he met her. Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't do anything about it. The middle-aged Taoist didn't seem to sense the killing intent. He pointed at the bamboo basket and gave the first answer. "I don't know how deep this pond is either." Xueqi was still polite on the surface. "May I ask what you're trying to catch?" The Taoist didn't hide anything and told the shocking truth in an indifferent tone. "It's a giant salamander. It once swallowed an item, and I want it back." Shenyuan Qingfeng asked tentatively, "Are you trying to catch that giant salamander?" The middle-aged Taoist was truly ignorant of worldly affairs. He nodded and said, "Yes." The young swordsman sneered. He was also straightforward and was about to draw his sword. He didn't draw his sword, but once he did, there would be blood. He didn't care if the Taoist sensed his killing intent. "I have a sword, which head in the world can't be cut off?" The Taoist sighed and put down the bamboo pole. He glanced at the bamboo basket and turned to smile. "I can't catch it this year. There are a few fruits left. If you don't think they're dirty, they can satisfy your hunger and thirst." Xueqi smiled but didn't say anything. The young swordsman, who had inexplicably loosened his grip, casually sat down and grabbed a wild fruit, handing it to Shenyuan Qingfeng first. She shook her head, so he directly tossed it into his mouth. There were still 3 or 4 left in the basket, so he swallowed them all. The middle-aged Taoist smiled. Shenyuan Qingfeng asked, "Which Taoist temple do you cultivate in?" The Taoist shook his head. "I'm like a lonely ghost. I don't have a place to stay. Fortunately, the Taoist ancestral court can accommodate me." Xueqi suddenly asked, "There's something I don't understand. Please enlighten me." The middle-aged Taoist nodded. "Please." Xueqi waved his sleeves and sat down, as if he wanted to discuss Taoism with the Taoist. He said in a deep voice, "My father once said that Buddhism is gold, Taoism is jade, and Confucianism is food. Although gold and jade are expensive, they don't make a lot of money. However, the world is like a person's body. One can't go without food for a day." The middle-aged Taoist interrupted in an old-fashioned tone. "It's okay to go without food for a day. You won't starve to death." Shenyuan Qingfeng was dumbstruck, and he was greatly disappointed. How could there be such an unreasonable debate? The Taoist priest's immortal bearing that was born from fishing for the great flood dragon salamander in the deep mountains was completely swept away. The swordsman laughed. Xueqi was good at maintaining his composure and wasn't angry at all. Fortunately, the Taoist added, "But if you go without food for a long time, something will happen." Xueqi continued calmly. "My father admits that there's a difference between good and evil, but denies that there's a difference between the 3 sections. What do you think?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded. "Good." Xueqi's face became more serious. "But my father is afraid of the undecided struggle between righteousness and profit. He only dares to publicly say that the three sects' purpose is to find a way out for the people. He says that Confucianism can't be Confucianism, Buddhism can't be Buddhism, and immortals can't be immortals if they don't follow this path. Regardless of the three sects, as long as you do good deeds and are loyal to humanity, you won't be far from the Great Way. Chapter 273. The Taoist priest smiled and said, "A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall." This was what Teacher Zhang said 2,000 years ago. It's not easy for your father to have such foresight and courage. I believe that if a man can correct his body and mind and gather true spirit, he can nurture great talents and virtues. As for where his roots lie, it doesn't matter if it's on the side of Confucianism, Buddhism, or my Taoism. However, since Taoism is led by the word Tao, no matter how long it's been, the later generations will have an innate advantage. As for the sage book written by Teacher Zhang's disciple, it can be said that it's reasonable, but it's unavoidable that it's scholarly. It's a good thing to set rules, but it's also a cage. There's no doubt that Teacher Zhang is a sage. However, no matter how high one's status is, there's still a sect bias. If I was born 2,000 years earlier, I would have boldly said to him, "Teacher Zhang thinks his words are rash, but I think it's wonderful." Not to mention Song Kelly and Shenyuan Qing Feng. Even the young swordsman who had never touched a book in his life was dumbfounded. This Taoist priest looked to be in his 40s, but his tone could stuff the whole world into his mouth. Teacher Zhang had already explained everything 2,000 years ago, but this Taoist priest had almost left no room for discussion today. Song Kelly stood up and bowed respectfully. However, no one knew what this young master of the Song family was thinking. Shenyuan Qingfeng said goodbye and led the way. After walking a distance, she subconsciously turned her head to look. The Taoist priest who should be average in martial arts but frightening in his words still did not move. When everyone was far away, the middle-aged Taoist priest shook his wrist and the fishing line was dragged up into the sky. There was no end to it. The hook had not been seen for a long time. How long was this fishing line? 1,000 feet? 2,000 feet? The middle-aged Taoist priest waited for the hook to come out of the water and said softly, "Fine, let's wait for another 10 years. The bamboo raft entered the Dragon King River from the Green Dragon Stream. The river was turbulent, but the bamboo raft was still stable. The old Taoist Zhao Shituan only brought his disciple out to see the scenery of the Xi River. Su Longxiang squatted on the raft and was no longer as afraid of water as before. The old Taoist priest was very pleased. Huang Man was born in the Vajra realm, which was rare in the world. Compared to the young leader of Wudong, Hong Shixiang, who was born with one more heart aperture, Hong Shixiang, who was born with one more heart aperture, he was born with one less heart aperture. His disciple, Huang Man was born with one less heart aperture. He did not have to worry about the heart aperture, which was said in the Taoist scripture, "If you don't understand longevity for years, your heart aperture will be filled with yellow dust." Therefore the old Taoist priest taught Su Longxiang the spring and autumn dream, which was the most suitable way to teach. As long as Su Longxiang was able to support the body of Vajra and reach the best state, he would be able to achieve what the old ancestor said, 300 years of spring and autumn dream, penetrating the Kunlun with one breath. Su Longxiang had not made any progress in learning other superior Taoist mental cultivation methods in Dragon Tiger Mountain. Now, Zhao Shituan only needed to wait patiently for his disciple to reach the minor longevity realm. How could Zhao Shituan not be happy? This was even happier than when the people at the foot of the mountain grew old and had children. He had spent almost 2 years with Su Longxiang at the pleasure temple at the foot of the mountain, and they had developed feelings for each other. Now, there was no need for His Royal Highness to threaten him with a letter. If anyone dared to bully Huang Man, he, Zhao Shituan, would be the first to disagree. Was the great celestial master Zhao, who was ranked second in seniority in the celestial master mansion, really just an old man's memorial tablet? The old Taoist's heroic spirit burst forth, and he increased the strength of the raft, flying like an arrow. Suddenly, he saw his disciple standing up, stretching his neck to look in the direction of the devil-slaying platform at the peak of the mountain, and let out a deafening roar. Zhao Shituan was stunned for a moment, and then a roar came from the devil-slaying platform, like the roar of a wild giant beast. The old Taoist was stunned for a moment, and then he clapped his hands and laughed. "Good, good, good. You are indeed my disciple to be able to have a telepathic connection with the black tiger under Qi Xuanzhen's mount. It's true that a mountain cannot have 2 tigers. Su Longxiang looked like he was about to jump off the raft and dash across the river. Zhao Shituan hurriedly shouted, "Disciple, don't rush, don't rush." If Su Longxiang had just come up the mountain, he would have jumped into the river without a care and fought to his heart's content with the beast. When he was young, he had torn apart several tigers, leopards, and bears alive. His strength was amazing, and those fierce generals who killed generals and captured flags on the battlefield were ashamed of their inferiority. However, at this time the old Taoist stopped him, and the idiot actually stopped. But he was still dissatisfied, and he turned his head to glare at the old Taoist. He held his breath and squatted beside the raft in a daze. The old Taoist was in a good mood as if he was drinking wine. He laughed heartily and said earnestly, "Disciple, that black tiger is not a simple beast. It was originally the king of all beasts in our dragon tiger mountain. Its frame is almost twice the size of an ordinary tiger, and its whole body is pitch black. For some reason, it went to the demon-slaying platform to listen to Qi Xuanzhen's lectures for many years. It is very intelligent. In terms of seniority, this guy is in the Jing generation on the mountain. Master has long been thinking about when to let you fight with it. You don't have to rush. Sooner or later I will let you fight to your heart's content." Su Longxiang snorted. Probably because of the mention of the black tiger under Qi Xuanzhen, Zhao Shituan's thoughts drifted away. He said softly, "Disciple, Master is telling you some secrets, and I feel uncomfortable if I don't tell you. From my perspective, there are very few Taoist immortals in the current generation. If not for Wudong's Hong Shixiang and Wang Zhongluo's departure, there would be even fewer of them. To Dragon Tiger Mountain, one family has been dominant for too long. It is inevitable that the younger generation will mistakenly think that they are the best in the world, and that is not a good thing. Let me calculate. Of course my brother is one, and Xianxia can also be counted as one. Zhao Danping is too smart, and she can't wait to calculate everything, which will damage her luck. Bai Yu and Xianxia are both strange. One is like Master's father, and the other is like Lu Dongxian. I believe that there will be no problem for them to become immortals in the future, but they still need time. As for the rest of the Jing generation, they are all uncertain. The few with the surname Zhao in the Taoist master's residence will not be able to take on big responsibilities in the future. In the Northern Orthodoxy, there are still 2 rogue immortals, but they are already so old, who knows when they will pass away. In the end, there are only these few left. I can count them with one hand. How tragic, they are far inferior to Buddhism." God knows if Su Longxiang was listening, but Zhao Shituan did not care. He turned the raft back and looked at the continuous mountain range. Suddenly he smiled and said slowly with pride, "That is not a problem. Dragon Tiger Mountain still has a land immortal guarding the mountain." Su Longxiang tilted his head. Zhao Shituan saw that there was a listener for the first time. He stroked his beard and smiled. 60 years ago, people only knew of my father and Qi Xuanzhen, but they did not know that there are immortals above immortals. The old Taoist wanted to keep them in suspense, but when he saw his disciple lowering his head to continue catching fish, he smiled and quickly said, "However, I can't say for sure how this immortal is. I only remember that when I was young, I went to the mountains to pick herbs and met a middle-aged Taoist. Later on, Qi Xuanzhen had already immortalized for more than 20 years. When I met that Taoist again, he did not seem to have aged at all. I was very curious, so I asked your ancestor. Do you know what your ancestor said? Your ancestor said that he met this person several times when he was young. Disciple, think about it. How old is he? Wudong Song Jiming has lived for 150 years and is known as the oldest person in the world. I conservatively estimate that the Taoist in the mountain is even older. Of course, this is similar to the Taoist jade seal at the bottom of the mountain. It is not easy to verify." Su Longxiang rolled his eyes. He had learned this habit from his brother. Zhao Shituan chuckled and slowly propped up his pole. He smacked his lips and said, "When your father led the army to Mount Longhu, he was forced by the general situation. Even our ancestor could not openly block the way. Everyone in the world knows that several courier soldiers ran 6 courier horses to death before they could deliver the imperial edict to the foot of Mount Longhu. However, no one knows that the last courier soldier died of exhaustion with his horse 60 li away. It was a nameless middle-aged Taoist who took over the imperial edict. Wherever he went, the rain of arrows could not reach him, and all swords and halberds were broken. During this time, more than 20 top experts under Bailiang were unable to stop him. They did not even see the Taoist's appearance clearly. Within half an hour, he arrived in front of the king of Bailiang. His Taoist robe was spotless. The old Taoist said in a daze, "Isn't this the Immortal of Earth? I wonder if we can meet again in this life." Chapter 274. About to be published, the next VIP chapter will be uploaded at midnight. Once the Bailiang heir left, Yangchun City finally regained its peace and happiness. No matter how the scholars of Hutting County denied it, as long as His Royal Highness was in Yangchun City, they felt uncomfortable all over. They had originally hoped that the imperial concubines in the palace would put pressure on the widow in Linlong's Lu family mansion. Unexpectedly, there was more thunder than rain, and the matter was left unsettled. Later on, Sir Bian Qingzhai was unexpectedly beaten to death. It was rumored that the entire imperial college in the capital was in an uproar. No less than several thousand students joined together to write a petition. Unfortunately, they were still unable to request for an imperial edict to be sent down to Jiangnan. That eldest brother of the dynasty had eaten his fill, patted his buttocks, and left Yangchun City. The caravan of horses left the city from the Lu Manor. They did not linger in Yangzhou, heading straight for the Taoist celestial capital, Mount Longhu. There were two carriages. Blue Bird, whose body had recovered at lightning speed, and the old god of swords, who was bored to death, drove separately. Su Fengnian had Yu Yuwei and Princess Jing'an sit together in the same carriage. The two women, whose fates had been filled with trials and tribulations, were probably in the same boat. Although they did not talk much, when pondered over it, there was a hint of a common enemy. However, Yu Yuwei was clearly a bit colder, while Pei Nanwei was more fervent. Su Fengnian turned a blind eye to the little schemes of this princess consort of the Rouge evaluation. He treated it as a small amusement that did not affect the overall situation. He believed that Yu Yuwei would not switch camps with just a few words. Su Fengnian sat in the carriage, counting his belongings on his fingers. He muttered to himself, "I have more than half of the Fu General's red armor in my hands, but it is too damaged. I don't know if it can be repaired to its original state. Generally speaking, I can confirm that the Fu General's battle power is directly linked to the strength of the puppet when it was alive. Mount Longhu is the ancestor of this school of exorcism and enslavement, so I cannot return empty-handed from this trip up the mountain." From the purple Forbidden Villa's whale-slaying sword, he took the most murderous move, Stacking Thunder, from the Green Water Pavilion sword practice manual. From Aunt Zhao's sword manual, he secretly learned the old god of swords, One Sword Immortal Kneeling. During this period of time, he flipped through the Book of Arms, and learned from Qing Niao that reversed the meridians of the armor removal. The drawing technique was learned from the Dongyue imperial family, and he imitated the steadying disturbance of the Nanhai nuns. All in all, together with old Huang's 9 swords, he could be considered to have gathered more than 20 moves. Su Fengnian caressed Wu Mainyang's head and said with a smile, "Gu Jiantang is the #1 saber user in the world. I wonder how many sabers he can block in a real fight?" Yu Yuwei had expected this. She said lightly, "I don't know." Su Fengnian did not expect to get an answer from Yu Yuwei. No matter how brilliant her sword dance was, it was not the way of the sword to kill. He flicked the white cat's head with his finger and said to himself, Chao Chongqing inadvertently said that Old Man Li, other than the two-sleeved green snake, also has an even more domineering sword to open the gate of heaven. It seems very arrogant, but why have I never heard of it before? There are no rumors of it in the Jianghu either. The old god of swords' two-sleeved green snake sword technique focuses on the sword will. Each time, it is complicated and simple. It is said to be one move, but in fact, it is full of changes. Every time, it is too late to dodge and escape. It is very difficult to divert attention to secretly learn it. The old god of swords made it sound nice, saying that he wanted to impart an absolute art. He was clearly venting his anger on me because he was bored. Princess Jing'an said sarcastically, "A man whose heart is not content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant." Su Fengnian followed suit. He went tit for tat and ridiculed, "Swallow? I know that Princess Consort's little mouth is very clever. Don't show off in front of me. Be careful that you go for wool and come home shorn. I will punish Princess Pei on the spot." Princess Pei had been teased and humiliated by His Highness over and over again about her private matters. She felt as if her weakness had been caught. In the past, she would fly into a rage out of humiliation every time. But today, her expression did not change. She just looked at him coldly and mocked. I thought your highness was not even afraid of the vassals. I have a whole new level of respect for you at the Reed Marsh. I didn't expect that you would be exposed as soon as you left Qingzhou and arrived at Yangzhou. You are just a paper dragon crossing the river. When you meet a Jianghu official, you have to pinch your nose and be bullied, obediently offering your maid to him with both hands. From this, it can be seen that even if you go to the Dragon Tiger Mountain where several Taoist masters are in charge, you will only be rebuffed. Su Fengnian's face darkened. He smiled darkly and said, Princess Pei's little mouth is becoming more and more unkind. Congratulations. His Royal Highness took the embroidered winter scabbard and lifted the curtain. He raised his voice and said, Xueqi, don't ride the horse. Take our Princess Pei to sit in the carriage at the back. Let her temper her backbone. Princess Pei was about to speak when she was kicked out of the carriage by Su Fengnian. Then, Xueqi reached out and grabbed her. Yu Yuwei shook her head, but her thin face did not reveal any joy or anger. Su Fengnian glanced at her and then sat near the carriage door. He hooked the curtain and looked at Blue Bird's slender back. He smiled softly and said, How is it? Blue Bird, who was in the middle of waving her whip, stopped the horse from galloping forward. She turned her head and looked at him with a vexed expression. She lowered her eyebrows and said, 2 golden dawn that are hard to buy even with thousands of gold. Su Fengnian's mood, which had been tormented by Princess Jing'an's words, instantly improved. He laughed and said, Blue Bird, you look very much like the stingy little wife that your husband bought expensive fish at the market. You're frugal and you know how to live your life. Blue Bird smiled gently and blushed slightly. Her expression was always light and indifferent. She was different from the waves and winds of death in the Reed Marsh. It was as if there was never any great sorrow on her face. The yearning for spring and the sorrow of autumn that women often had nothing to do with her. Su Fengnian and Blue Bird had been talking without holding back. He said bluntly, Let's let Xueqi and Princess Pei stay in the same room. With Xueqi's secret disguising technique in the south, I don't know how much of a resemblance she can make. If it's just a look, it's most likely a waste of effort. Before we go to Mount Longhu, let's see if our Aunt Shu's results can really be passed off as genuine. Blue Bird asked doubtfully, Xueqi wants to make a human skin mask? Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. It has to be a bit more clever. Xueqi roughly explained the steps to me before. It's very complicated. It's the same as the Taoist method of alchemy. It's the most brilliant method of both internal and external cultivation. If she wants to succeed, Xueqi will have to suffer a lot. However, only through suffering can one rise above others. This saying is most appropriate for Xueqi. If she succeeds by luck, she will become one of the few official consorts in the dynasty. With Xueqi's personality, she will fight for this kind of opportunity even if it means her life. Blue Bird asked softly and carefully, King of Jing'an is an old fox. He's the most treacherous and ruthless person in the world. How could he not recognize it? Su Fengnian nodded and said, The lecherous heir, Zhao Sun, might not be able to see through it, but his old man, Zhao Heng, would definitely be able to see through it with just a few glances. Thus, I had to first write a letter to test the waters and simply reveal the truth. If the Prince of Jing'an's estate is willing to accept the fake princess consort and put her up as a memorial archway to ensure that they won't lose face, then everyone will be happy. If they aren't willing, then it's also within reason. I'll just treat it as having Xu Xian discipline Princess Consort Pei, then I won't lose anything. Putting aside the fact that I took the risk of keeping the good-looking but useless Princess Consort Jing'an, this woman still doesn't know what's good for her and comes to poke at me every few days. Blue Bird still couldn't believe that the Jing'an Palace would accept such an absurd arrangement. Would they allow a fake consort to take over the turtle dove's nest? King of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, had always been scolded by His Royal Highness as a narrow-minded and jealous woman. Could he endure it? Su Fengnian could see the incredulity on Blue Bird's face. He smiled and said, Just treat it as a gamble. Su Fengnian heard the cry of the green and white Luan and lifted the curtain of the carriage. The handsome spirit bird instantly pierced inside. His Royal Highness held up his arm to stop the bird. His right hand took out a section of a jade tube and took out the secret letter. After reading it, he handed it over to Yu Yuwei. The latter read it carefully. She raised her head and said, The Imperial Court wants to change the system of prefectures and counties to the system of roads. The world will be divided into 16 roads. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Tell me what you think." Yu Wei thought for a moment and then said softly, "After the 8 kingdoms were pacified, the territory of the dynasty expanded several times. Now, there are more than 1,800 prefectures and counties. The large prefectures that were originally set up to accommodate the old 8 kingdoms could easily become vassal towns. It is indeed difficult for the central government of the empire to control them. From the letter, it seems that everything will be messed up. There will be a new system of 16 roads and 76 prefectures. The large prefectures will be split into several smaller prefectures, and the large prefectures will all be raised to prefectures. The changes to the foundation of the 1,800 counties will be relatively small." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I heard from Su Xiao that Grand Secretary Zhang Julu has been waiting for this day for almost 20 years. Yu Wei frowned and said, "But the prefectures and counties will become level 4. Isn't the empire afraid that the decree will be blocked? If it is to reduce the vassal states, isn't the price a bit too high?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "It's not that simple. Except for the 7 vassal states including Su Xiao, the rest of the prefectures and supervisors will be changed every 4 or 6 years. However, the decree has not been issued yet. After about 3 or 4 years, when the situation is more or less stable, it will be Zhang Julu's turn." Su Fengnian pointed at the secret letter and sneered, "Don't forget that in addition to the road system, the imperial court has also taken action against both Buddhism and Taoism. In the past, the management of Buddhism was not strict and only set up the Chongxian Bureau in the Honglu Temple of the Ministry of Rites to manage the monks and appoint the 3 principals. In the future, there will be the position of head monk. It is just that I don't know which monk has the qualifications to be the first head of the world's monks. I guess Yang Taisui may not be willing to show up. As for Taoism, the imperial court has a longer reach. All the disciples of Taoism will be tested and divided into 11 levels. Except for the Taoist mansion, which is the only exception, all the Taoists in the world will be promoted under this framework. Thinking back to the warrior selection system that took the lead not long ago, do you think that the 3 sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism will all be under the control of the imperial court?" Yu Wei murmured, "Heaven's net has a long grind, but it does not escape." Chapter 275. Su San was a postman. He was the 3rd in his family, so he was called Su San. Old man Lu, who was born 10 years later, did not have the good fortune to participate in the Great War of the spring and autumn period. Although he was from the 2 Bailiang, his body was not as strong as a young man's, and he was afraid of the cold in the north, so he moved his family to the south. When he had nothing to do, he would tell Su San and the other young men about how thrilling the Great War of the spring and autumn period was. He especially liked to talk about how heroic the king of Bailiang was. Every time they heard the same old story, they would not get tired of it. Su San was the most like this, wishing that his parents would kick him out of the womb. Not to mention, now that the world had settled down, no matter how poor the people in the village were, they did not have to worry about losing their heads. They only had a few mu of land, so every family had something to look forward to. When it snowed a few feet thick in the past, the old people would sigh that no one could make it through this weather, but now it was different. Even when they looked at the snow on the stove, they would laugh and say that a timely snow was a sign of good harvest. Su San did not read or write, but he still understood the logic. Old man Lu said that this relay station was built by the king of Bailiang himself. There was a relay station for 30 li. Whoever dared to embezzle the salary of the courier, no matter how high the official was, he would be taken down and beheaded on the spot. Moreover, Su San and the king of Bailiang had the same surname. After he became a postman, every time he ran a horse to deliver a letter, he would be especially diligent. He felt that he could not disgrace this surname, right? Last year, it was the first time in recent years that the Jiming relay station had encountered an urgent cargo that needed to be sent to the north. Su San's physique and equestrian skills were the best in the relay station, so he naturally took on the heavy responsibility. Unexpectedly, misfortune and good fortune came together. Originally, it was old man Lu who wanted to train Su San, but midway, there was an accident. When he was handed over to the next relay station, he was told that the cargo was damaged. The eunuch who was handing over the cargo screamed in a shrill voice that he wanted to confiscate Su San's property and exterminate his entire family as if his ancestors of 18 generations had died. Su San had not seen much of the world, but he had been influenced by old man Lu and knew that the eunuchs who came out of the capital to work for the imperial family could not be offended. At that time, He kowtowed and begged for mercy, only begging that the pale-faced beardless old eunuch to only kill him to vent his anger. How could the eunuch pay any attention to the pleas of a small commoner? He forced the several high-ranking officials in the county beside him to state that the cargo was fresh lychees that the imperial concubine wanted and was stored in an exquisite ice cellar. The damned mail broke the box. The box was already hard to buy with 1,000 gold, and the lychees shipped from the southern border were even more undesirable. The officials had no choice but to agree. How could Su-san not accept his fate? But for some reason, the sound of horse hooves thundering could be heard, and a few hundred soldiers in bright armor escorted a general to the relay station. Seeing the situation, he pulled out his Baelyang saber and chopped off the eunuch's head. The general had Su-san stand up, and then turned to the county government officials beside him who were all silent like cicadas in winter. He asked with a smile, "Do you deserve to die for killing a courier?" The officials had said that he deserved to die twice in a day. Su-san, who had narrowly escaped death, finally found out that the general was the king of Baelyang. Su-san's face was pale, but he still urged his horse to gallop forward without a care for anything else. He had long since run out of sweat, and his lips were cracked, leaving only traces of blood. His eyes could not see the road clearly, and he did not know how long the courier horse could last. Last night, Old Man Lu was greatly startled when he arrived at the Chicken Cry relay station with a rush of 800 li. It should be known that the robust courier who delivered the documents from the palace had only just arrived at the relay station when he said, "By imperial decree, deliver it to Mount Longhu for the Great Pillar State," before he died of exhaustion and fell off his horse. Old Man Lu looked around. Su-san was the only one who did not say anything. He quickly led out a fine horse from the stable that he cherished more than he cherished his wife. He untied the bundle and tied it around his neck. The king of Baelyang had built close to 2,000 relay stations, and he once said that the courier should go all out and lead the way. Su-san was crude and could not speak of great principles, but he knew what it meant to lead the way. At this moment, Su-san was on his last breath, and he was close to dying. He kept telling himself that he was just 20 miles away, and he could not die. If he delayed the king of Baelyang's important matters, he would feel guilty for saving his life. How would he have the face to stand in the world? In his blurry vision, a person floated over on the road. The front legs of the horse Su-san was on went soft, and it died on the spot, throwing Su-san out. Su-san rolled down the official road. He could not see the person's face clearly, but he could vaguely see the person's Taoist robe. He clutched the bag tightly and said with all his strength, "Jimming Relay Station Su-bin, 800 miles urgent, please send it to Mount Longhu." The Taoist squatted down and nodded. Su-san turned his head with difficulty to look at his beloved horse that had died on the spot, and then looked in the direction of Mount Longhu. His breathing was cut off, and he died with his eyes wide open. The middle-aged Taoist sighed softly and closed the young courier's eyes. He took off the bag and opened it, revealing a bright yellow imperial edict. He held the edict in his right hand, and his right hand was behind his back. With a tap of his toes, his body was like a rainbow piercing through the sun, and no one could see his true appearance. The middle-aged Taoist drove straight in until he reached the flag with the character Su. He threw out the imperial edict and turned to float away. The two waves of arrows in the air froze, not falling forward. They only fell to the ground after the Taoist's figure had disappeared. That year, at the critical moment, the yellow Taoist priest on the mountain and the Baelyang cavalry at the foot of the mountain were finally able to coexist peacefully because of this imperial edict. Tonight, the primordial spirit of the middle-aged Taoist priest whose Taoist name was not seen on Mount Longhu, had left his body and arrived at Mount Quanglu. Seeing that His Highness had put away the dagger talisman, hung it casually on his waist, and pulled out two knives, the middle-aged Taoist priest standing on the dragon's head said in an old-fashioned manner, "I have met Su Shao once at the foot of the mountain." Su Fengnian remembered a dusty past he had accidentally learned from Chu Lushan. He raised his head and asked, "You are the Taoist who delivered the imperial edict at the foot of Mount Longhu?" Chapter 276. The middle-aged Taoist said expressionlessly, "That's right." Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment before holding his sabers. He bowed and said, "Su Fengnian greets the Immortal Elder. My father once said that Mount Longhu was the best in the mystic enlightening realm, not Taoist Qi who ascended to immortality 50 years ago." The middle-aged Taoist was indifferent as he looked down at Su Fengnian and the talisman. Su Fengnian bowed and asked, I'm curious as to why the immortal elder can ascend to immortality but not enter the heavenly gate but not enter it? The middle-aged Taoist said calmly, My surname is Zhao. The same surname as the emperor? These words were enough to explain many mysteries. Why did the previous great celestial master not hesitate to exchange his life to extend the life of the previous emperor? Why did the imperial court continue to confer titles to Mount Longhu and raise the status of this ancestral court? Why was the current great celestial master Zhao Danping like a fish in water in the capital? Why was Mr. White Lotus favored by the emperor? Su Fengnian's hands trembled as he looked up and gritted his teeth. The immortal elder is already an outsider. The Taoist, whose age and cultivation were unfathomable, smiled faintly. Have you heard of the saying that when a man achieves immortality, even his chickens and dogs ascend to heaven? Besides, I haven't ascended to immortality yet, so what's wrong with protecting my descendants? Su Fengnian asked again and again. Immortal elder, may I know what lesson you have for coming here with your out-of-body primordial spirit? The middle-aged Taoist did not answer the question. Instead, he pointed behind Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian did not dare to turn his head as he was afraid that he would not know how he died. The Taoist frowned and said, Although I'm not a saint, I'm not going to argue with a junior like you. Back then, Su Xiao had the same principle. My descendants have their own fortune and misfortune. As long as no one deliberately deviates, even if the country is destroyed, I won't interfere with the heavenly secrets. Su Fengnian turned his head and widened his eyes. Unknowingly, a giant python with a red tongue appeared behind him, confronting the heavenly dragon Zhang Su. The giant python versus the dragon. The giant python that seemed to have occupied the entire mountain was fearless. Su Fengnian was in awe of the golden dragon, but for some reason, he was not afraid of the giant python. Instead, he felt a sense of intimacy from the bottom of his heart. When the giant saw Su Fengnian turned around, it lowered its head and rubbed its head against Su Fengnian's forehead. The heavenly dragon seemed to be enraged by the giant python. The purple gas it breathed out grew thicker and its body rose higher, revealing half of its body. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it roared furiously at the peak of Kuanglu Mountain. The purple gas seemed to have materialized and condensed into a purple pillar that charged forward. I don't care if you're a celestial being or an immortal. There's no reason for me, Su Fengnian, to accept my fate and beg for death. Just as Su Fengnian was about to draw his saber, the giant python at the top of the coiling dragon mountain raised its head and straightened its body. It bit the purple pillar of dragon qi and crushed it in an instant. In a trance, the middle-aged Taoist priest, who seemed to be standing on top of all living things, just watched coldly from the sidelines. The heavenly dragon roared. Su Fengnian saw that there were no longer any stars in the sky. The clouds rolled and surged like raging waves. They gathered above the heavenly dragon's head, layer upon layer, becoming increasingly dense. Fengnian. Su Fengnian was still terrified by the invincible might of the golden sky dragon when he heard a familiar voice. He turned his head abruptly and saw that person. At this critical moment of life and death, he was oblivious to everything in the world and was only crying. A white-robed woman's sleeves fluttered in the wind. She had once taken her sword out of the sword tomb. She had once played the fish dragon drum in white clothes. She had once punished him by holding a book against the wall. She had once worn the cloth shoes personally made by Su Xiao and entered the imperial palace alone. Su Fengnian's voice was hoarse as he carefully called out, "Mother!" He was afraid that if he shouted too loudly, she would disappear with the wind. Her body was transparent, and she slowly floated over like a fairy from Dunhuang. She floated in the air as if she wanted to caress her son's cheeks. The middle-aged Taoist finally spoke. He snorted coldly and said, "You're going against the heavenly Tao." He waved his sleeves and smashed the giant white python's head onto the ground. "Wu Su, go to the Yellow Springs." He waved his sleeves again, and a strong wind blew. The white-robed woman who was only a few feet away from Su Fengnian retreated with the wind. The woman raised her head and sneered, "Zhao Huangchao, why didn't you enter the heavenly gate?" Su Fengnian saw his mother's body gradually becoming blurry, turning into a stream of light and dissipating. He was completely mad. His eyes were red as he stretched out his hand to grab her. The middle-aged Taoist was, after all, a well-deserved Earth Immortal. She, who had already defied the heavenly Tao, moved forward with difficulty and allowed her soul to dissipate. She stretched out her hand and held Su Fengnian's hand. The middle-aged Taoist's vast Taoist chi poured down from the sky. He raised his palm and said angrily, "The heavenly Tao is majestic. Demons, retreat." Instantly, thunder rumbled. The Taoist slammed his palm down. The Taoist carried out justice on behalf of the heavens. The white-robed woman, from her feet to her waist, slowly disappeared like dust along with the giant python. Su Fengnian, whose face was full of tears, shouted at the top of his lungs, "Mother!" She smiled and said kindly, "Fengnian, I can't take care of you anymore. I can't bear to part with you." Su Fengnian shook his head like a madman. In that instant, 20 years of his life flashed through his mind, disappearing in an instant. Until Li Chungang said that he had a sword to open the heavenly gate. Su Fengnian only felt that his acupuncture points were exploding, his meridians were exploding, his flesh was exploding, and his soul was exploding. Everything exploded. Even if I die today, what's there to be afraid of? My mother is dead. You damned Taoist even dispersed my mother's soul. Why can't I kill you? He turned to face the golden dragon and the middle-aged Taoist and roared, F***CK the heavenly Tao. I have a blade that can slay the dragon. Su Fengnian didn't have a blade in his hand. As soon as he said that, the giant python and fireflies gathered, and a snow-white divine weapon appeared in Su Fengnian's hand. I have a blade that can kill immortals. The blade cut through the air. The color of heaven and earth changed. There were no more dragons, no more immortals. Su Fengnian slowly opened his eyes. The top of Kuanglu Mountain was clear. Li Chungang, Blue Bird, and the others didn't come after hearing the news. Su Fengnian looked down. The divine talisman was still in his fingers, and the embroidered winter-spring thunder was inserted into the ground. Su Fengnian touched his cheeks. They were full of tears. So it was just a dream. Su Fengnian turned his head and squeezed out a smile. He looked at the silent void and murmured, "Mother, rest in peace." Then he turned his head and looked at the starry sky. Su Fengnian said word by word, "I have a blade that can kill the dragon."